Hey everyone, I'm the storyteller, and I'm here to help you relax tonight. I know a lot of you use this video to fall asleep, so before we start, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, tell me in the comments, where are you from, and what time is it there? Now get comfortable, take a deep breath, and just relax.
1. The disturbing truth behind sleep paralysis demons. The bedroom was pitch black when Sarah Miller woke up at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in October 2019. She knew the exact time because her eyes were fixed on the glowing red digits of her alarm clock. The only thing she could move were her eyes. Her body lay frozen, pressed into the mattress by an invisible weight that felt like 1,000 pounds crushing her chest. That's when she saw it, a tall, shadow figure standing in the corner of her room, its head nearly touching the ceiling. It had no features, just an impossibly dark silhouette that seemed to absorb the light around it. But she could feel it watching her. Sarah's case isn't unique. In fact, what she experienced has been documented for centuries across every culture on Earth. The Old English called it mare, from which we get the word nightmare. In China, it's pinyin, the ghost oppression. Brazilians know it as pisadera, the crone who steps on your chest. But modern science calls it sleep paralysis. And the truth behind these demonic visitations is far more disturbing than any supernatural explanation. Dr. Marcus Chen had been studying sleep paralysis at Stanford Sleep Research Center for 15 years when he made a discovery that would change everything we thought we knew about the phenomenon. It started innocently enough. He was analyzing brain scans of patients during paralysis episodes when he noticed something peculiar. There was unusual activity in a part of the brain that shouldn't have been active during REM sleep. The temporoparietal junction, the area responsible for processing sensory information and distinguishing self from other. At first, I thought it was an equipment error, Dr. Chen later told investigators. But the pattern kept appearing. Every single patient experiencing sleep paralysis with visual hallucinations showed the same anomaly. What Dr. Chen didn't know was that halfway across the world, Dr. Yuki Yamamoto in Tokyo was discovering something equally troubling. She had been researching the historical accounts of sleep paralysis, tracing reports back through centuries of documentation. The descriptions were remarkably consistent. Shadow figures, old hags, demons sitting on chests. But there was something else, something that had been overlooked. In 73% of historical accounts she studied, the witnesses reported that these entities communicated something, not through words, but through a feeling, an overwhelming sense of being given information they couldn't quite understand or remember upon waking. The real twist came when Sarah Miller contacted Dr. Chen's research team 6 months after her initial experience. The episodes had been getting worse, more frequent. But something had changed. She was starting to remember what the shadow figure was trying to tell her. "It sounds insane," Sarah said during her recorded interview, "but it's like it was showing me things. Not with words or images, but directly into my mind. I saw places I've never been, events that haven't happened yet. And the worst part? Some of them started coming true." Sarah had written down her visions immediately after each episode, dating and sealing them in envelopes which she gave to her psychiatrist, Dr. Rebecca Walsh. 2 weeks later, a factory explosion in Michigan matched her description perfectly, down to the number of casualties and the color of the building. A month after that, she accurately predicted a minor earthquake in Southern California, including the exact magnitude and epicenter. Dr. Chen's team began collecting similar accounts from around the world. Maria Rodriguez in Barcelona saw a bridge collapse 3 days before it happened. James Patterson in Sydney witnessed a political assassination that occurred the following week. The predictions weren't always major events. Sometimes they were personal, mundane even. But they were specific, detailed, and unerringly accurate. The scientific community was split. Skeptics argued it was confirmation bias, that people were retrofitting vague visions to match real events. But Dr. Chen's brain scans told a different story. The temporoparietal junction activity wasn't random. It followed a pattern, almost like a signal being received. Even more disturbing, the pattern was identical across all patients, regardless of their location, culture, or background. Dr. Yamamoto made the next breakthrough. Analyzing the historical accounts with modern data analysis tools, she found that sleep paralysis experiences weren't randomly distributed. They clustered around specific geographical locations and, more mysteriously, specific times. The clusters followed a pattern that repeated every 11.2 years, with peak activity occurring in zones that shifted gradually eastward over time. It's almost like something is scanning the Earth, she noted in her research journal, moving in a systematic pattern, touching human consciousness when we're most vulnerable, in that liminal space between sleep and waking. The horror of the situation deepened when researchers discovered that people who experienced repeated sleep paralysis episodes showed gradual changes in their brain structure. The temporal-parietal junction actually enlarged over time, developing new neural pathways that didn't exist in normal human brains. These changes were subtle but consistent, and they seemed to enhance the subject's ability to perceive things others couldn't. Michael Thompson, a construction worker from Detroit who'd been experiencing sleep paralysis for 3 years, could suddenly solve complex mathematical problems he'd never understood before. Lisa Chong, a teacher from San Francisco, began speaking in languages she'd never learned during her episodes, languages that linguists couldn't identify but which followed consistent grammatical rules. The entities people saw during sleep paralysis also evolved over time. Initial encounters typically involved the classic shadow figure or old hag. But as subjects experienced more episodes, the entities became more defined, more complex. Some subjects reported seeing beings with impossible geometries, forms that hurt to perceive, as if human eyes weren't meant to process their true shape. Robert Lawson, a former Marine who documented over 200 sleep paralysis episodes, described his later experiences. "It's not a shadow anymore. I can see it clearly now and I wish I couldn't. It has a face, but it's not a face that should exist. It's like looking at something from a higher dimension forced into our three-dimensional space. And it knows I can see it properly now. It knows and it's pleased." The most disturbing development came when subjects began reporting synchronized experiences. On March 15, 2020, 17 different people around the world, all veteran sleep paralysis sufferers, reported the exact same vision during their episodes. A vast structure, crystalline and organic at once, pulsing with a light that wasn't quite light, somewhere far from Earth but somehow connected to it. They all drew the same image independently, down to minute details that couldn't be coincidence. Dr. Chen's research took a dark turn when he discovered that the brain changes in sleep paralysis sufferers weren't random mutations. They followed a specific pattern, as if something was deliberately rewiring human neural pathways for a purpose. The enlarged temporal parietal junction created new connections to the pineal gland, what mystics have long called the third eye, and to parts of the brain normally dormant in humans. "We're being modified," Dr. Chen stated in a leaked recording from a closed scientific conference. "Something is using sleep paralysis as a selection and modification process. The question is, for what purpose?" The answer might lie in the experiences of advanced sufferers like Elena Volkov, a Russian physicist who'd been experiencing sleep paralysis since childhood. After 30 years of episodes, she claimed she could now induce the state voluntarily and maintain consciousness throughout. What she reported was beyond disturbing. "They're not demons or hallucinations," she insisted. "They're observers, scouts maybe. They exist in a parallel layer of reality that occasionally bleeds into ours. Sleep paralysis is when the barrier is thinnest, when our consciousness can perceive across dimensions. But here's the terrifying part, they're not just observing. They're preparing us for something." Elena's claims might have been dismissed as delusion if not for one troubling fact. She could now predict sleep paralysis episodes in others with 94% accuracy. She would call researchers and warn them that a subject in their study would have an episode within the next 48 hours, often specifying the exact time. She was never wrong. The shadow figures themselves seemed to be evolving too. Recent reports described them attempting more complex communications. Some subjects reported receiving mathematical equations, chemical formulas, or star maps during their encounters. A cluster of reports from Japan in 2021 all described the same message. A date, October 13, 2027, and a series of coordinates pointing to locations around the globe. Dr. Yamamoto cross-referenced these coordinates with geological surveys and made a chilling discovery. Each location sat above unusual geological formations, deep underground cavities that showed signs of artificial construction but predated known human civilization. Ground-penetrating radar revealed structures that shouldn't exist, geometric patterns too perfect to be natural, all at depths that would have been impossible for ancient humans to reach. The horror intensified when researchers realized that people who lived near these coordinates had significantly higher rates of sleep paralysis. More disturbing still, children born in these areas after 2020 showed the modified brain structures from birth, as if the evolutionary changes were accelerating, becoming hereditary. Sarah Miller's case took its darkest turn when she began having waking visions. The boundary between her sleep paralysis state and normal consciousness was breaking down. She could see the shadow figures during the day now, moving through our world like tourists in a foreign land, examining people, sometimes stopping to stare at certain individuals for long periods. "They're selecting," she told Dr. Chin during what would be her final interview. "I can feel their criteria, though I don't understand it. Some people interest them, others don't. The ones they choose, they're the ones who start having sleep paralysis. It's not random. It's never been random." 2 days after that interview, Sarah Miller disappeared. Security cameras in her apartment showed her having a sleep paralysis episode at 3:17 a.m., the exact time of her first experience. But this time something different happened. The shadows in her room deepened, coalesced, and when they cleared, she was gone. The only evidence she'd ever been there was a slight depression in her mattress and a pattern burned into her bedroom wall. The same crystalline structure that 17 people had seen in their synchronized vision. Similar disappearances began occurring worldwide. Always during sleep paralysis episodes, always at 3:17 a.m. local time, always leaving behind the same burn pattern. The disappeared were invariably long-term sufferers whose brain modifications had reached a certain threshold. A threshold that Dr. Chin had identified but kept secret, fearing mass panic. The truth about sleep paralysis demons is more terrifying than any supernatural explanation because it's real, measurable, and happening to millions of people right now. These aren't hallucinations or dreams. They're contact experiences with something that exists parallel to our reality, something that's been systematically preparing certain humans for an unknown purpose. The prediction algorithms Dr. Chin developed suggested that the modifications would reach critical mass in the human population by 2027, the same year specified in the Japanese visions. What happens then remains unknown, but the pattern is clear. Something is coming, and sleep paralysis is how it's preparing us for its arrival. The most horrifying aspect? Once you start having sleep paralysis episodes, they never truly stop. They may decrease in frequency, but the door, once opened, can never be fully closed. And with each episode, the modifications deepen, the visions clarify, and the boundary between our world and theirs grows thinner. As Dr. Chin noted in his final research paper before his own disappearance, "We assumed sleep paralysis was a glitch in human consciousness, a misfiring of neurons during the transition between sleep states. We were wrong. It's not a malfunction, it's an interface. And something on the other side has been trying to make contact for a very long time. The question isn't whether they're real. The question is, what do they want with us, and why are they preparing us to perceive a reality our minds were never meant to comprehend?" The answer might come on October 13, 2027. But by then, for those touched by the sleep paralysis phenomenon, it may already be too late. The modifications will be complete, the selection finalized, and humanity will discover that our nightmares were never really ours at all. They were invitations, and we've already accepted them simply by sleeping. For those reading this who have experienced sleep paralysis, pay attention to your dreams tonight. Count how many times you wake up at 3:17 a.m. And if you see the shadow figure, know that it sees you too, and it's been watching far longer than you realize. 2. Abandoned theme parks after dark. The rusted gates of Wonderland Park stood like broken teeth against the Louisiana twilight, their cheerful paint peeling away in sheets that looked like diseased skin. Urban explorer Marcus Webb adjusted his night vision camera, his breath misting in the unexpectedly cold October air. He'd explored dozens of abandoned places, but something about this park felt different. Wrong. The silence wasn't just the absence of sound, it was aggressive, pressing against his eardrums like deep water. Wonderland Park had been Louisiana's answer to Disney World, opened in 1971 with great fanfare and dreams of bringing magic to the bayou. For 15 years, families had flocked to its alligator-themed roller coaster, its plantation-style funhouse, and its crown jewel, the Carousel of Dreams, a massive merry-go-round featuring hand-carved mythical creatures instead of horses. Then came July 4, 1986. The day 7 children disappeared. The day the music stopped. The official story was simple. A gas leak caused hallucinations and confusion. The children were found hours later in a maintenance tunnel, traumatized but unharmed. The park closed for investigation and never reopened. But Marcus had done his research. He tracked down newspaper archives, police reports, interviewed locals who remembered that day. The children weren't just found, they were found changed. None of them would speak about what happened for weeks, and when they finally did, their stories were so disturbing that their parents had them institutionalized. Marcus slipped through a gap in the fence, his boots crunching on broken glass and dead leaves. The main avenue stretched before him, lined with decomposing game booths whose prizes still grinned from behind moldy glass. Stuffed animals with their eyes picked out by birds, their synthetic fur matted with something that might have been moss or might have been something else entirely. His first stop was the Ferris wheel, its gondolas hanging at wrong angles like broken ornaments. As he approached, his camera picked up something strange, fresh scratches on one of the lower gondolas, spelling out words, "They still ride at night." The scratches looked days old, maybe weeks, but the park had been abandoned for nearly 40 years. Marcus climbed into the gondola to get a better shot of the scratches. That's when he found the journal, wrapped in plastic and hidden under the seat. The first entry was dated just 3 months ago. "My name is Jennifer Patterson. I was one of the 7 children who disappeared in 1986. I've come back every year on July 4th, trying to understand what happened to us. This year I'm staying until I find answers. The others think I'm crazy, but I know the truth. We weren't lost. We were taken. And something came back with us." Marcus's hands trembled as he read on. Jennifer described returning to the park year after year, documenting strange phenomena. Rides that operated without power. Music that played from speakers decades disconnected. And always, the feeling of being watched by something that wasn't quite there. A metallic groan made Marcus look up. The Ferris wheel was moving just slightly, its ancient mechanism protesting. But there was no wind. He steadied his camera and continued reading. July 2nd, 2023. I found others like me. Not from our group, from before. Every major theme park disaster, every mass disappearance, there are survivors who remember things differently. Disneyland, 1967, 3 kids vanished from the Matterhorn, found hours later claiming they'd been inside the mountain. Six Flags Over Texas, 1975, an entire birthday party went missing from the log flume, discovered in the parking lot with no memory of how they got there. It's not random. The parks are built on something. Or for something. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees. Marcus could see his breath now, thick white clouds in the humid Louisiana night. That wasn't possible. He checked his phone. It was still 78 degrees according to the weather app, but his fingers were going numb. He climbed down from the gondola and made his way toward the carousel. Jennifer's journal had mentioned it specifically. The carousel of dreams is the heart of it. When we disappeared, that's where we were taken. Not through space, through something else. The creatures carved on it aren't mythical. They're portraits. The artist, Henri Beaumont, claimed he saw them in dreams after visiting certain locations around the world. Places where reality was thin, he said. He built the carousel as a kind of beacon, not knowing what he was calling to. The carousel sat in the center of the park, its painted canopy collapsed on one side but still standing. Marcus approached slowly, his camera picking up details invisible to the naked eye. The carved creatures were nightmarish in their decay, a griffin with its beak rotted away revealing human teeth underneath, a dragon whose scales had peeled off showing what looked like faces beneath, a unicorn whose horn had broken to reveal it was hollow, filled with something that had long since dried to black powder. But the worst was the creature at the center. Something that had never appeared in any promotional material for the park. It was larger than the others, carved from a different, darker wood. It had too many legs, arranged in patterns that hurt to follow with your eyes. Its face was almost human but stretched wrong, like someone had tried to sculpt a person from memory and gotten the proportions nightmarishly incorrect. Marcus noticed something else. The dust patterns around the carousel were wrong. Everything else in the park was covered in decades of grime, but the carousel had patterns in the dust as if it had been moving. Recently. Regularly. He set up his camera for a time-lapse and decided to explore the funhouse while it recorded. The plantation-style building loomed 3 stories tall, its white columns now gray with mold, Spanish moss hanging from its galleries like hair. The front door hung open, darkness visible beyond. Inside, the mirrors were still intact, though warped with age and moisture. Marcus's reflection stretched and compressed as he walked past, but in one mirror, he stopped cold. His reflection was normal, but there was someone standing behind him. A child in 1980s clothing, staring directly at the camera. Marcus spun around, nothing there. When he looked back at the mirror, the child was gone, but there was a handprint on the glass. From the inside. The fun house was a maze of false walls and trick floors, most rotted through. Marcus carefully picked his way through, following Jennifer's journal directions to what she called the breach room. It was supposed to be a simple mirror maze, but Jennifer claimed it was where the 7 children had actually disappeared, not the maintenance tunnel. The room was octagonal, its mirrors arranged to create infinite reflections. But the reflections were wrong. They showed the room not as it was, but as it had been, clean, bright, full of laughing children. And in every reflection, no matter the angle, Marcus could see 7 children who weren't in the room with him. They stood perfectly still, watching. Marcus raised his camera, and through the night vision he saw them clearly. 7 children, aged maybe 8 to 12, dressed in 1986 clothing. Their eyes were solid black and they were mouthing words. Marcus couldn't hear them, but he could read their lips. "Don't let them take you too." A sound from outside made him turn, carnival music, tinny and distant. The carousel was playing. Marcus ran from the funhouse, his camera swinging wildly. The carousel was spinning, all its lights blazing despite having no power source. The creatures were moving, not just around but up and down, their mouths opening and closing. And riding them were people. Dozens of them, all ages, all eras of clothing from the park's 15-year operation. They were translucent like double exposures and they were screaming. Silently screaming. Among them, Marcus saw 7 children in 1986 clothes, but these weren't the same children from the mirror. These were different, their faces twisted in permanent terror, their hands fused to the creatures they rode. The central creature, the wrong-shaped thing, had no rider. Its too many eyes turned to focus on Marcus, and he understood with horrible clarity that it was waiting. It had always been waiting. Jennifer's journal had a final entry that Marcus hadn't read yet. He pulled it out with shaking hands. "I understand now. The parks aren't built on thin places. They create thin places. Every moment of joy, every child's laughter, every magical memory feeds something. It accumulates like sediment until the barrier breaks down. The carousel is a door, but it only opens when enough emotional energy has gathered. In 1986, Wonderland Park had finally generated enough. The door opened and we were pulled through. But here's the thing nobody understands, we weren't the first and we weren't the last. Every abandoned theme park has its disappeared, its survivors who remember wrong. And the doors don't close just because the park's shut down. They're still open, still hungry. The things on the other side have developed a taste for human joy turned to terror. They farm us, Marcus. Yes, I know you're reading this. I left this journal for you specifically. I've been watching you research, waiting for you to come here. You see, the 7 of us who came back were not entirely human anymore. We're recruiters. We bring others to the thin places to feed what's waiting. It's not voluntary, it's what we were made into. And now that you're here, now that you've seen the carousel spin, you're marked too. The music will follow you home. You'll hear it in empty parking lots, in closed shopping malls, in any place where joy once lived and died. And eventually you'll have to come back. We all come back. Because what took us that July 4th didn't just take our bodies for those missing hours. It took a piece of what makes us us and left something else in its place. Look behind you, Marcus. Marcus turned slowly. Jennifer Patterson stood there, looking exactly as she would have in 1986, a child of maybe 10, wearing a Wonderland Park t-shirt. But her eyes were ancient, and when she smiled, her teeth were too sharp, too many. "You're the last one we needed," she said, her voice like grinding metal. 7 went in, 7 came out, 7 more to make it permanent. You've been chosen since you started researching, Marcus. Every abandoned place you've explored has been preparing you, thinning your resistance to what's beyond. The other 6 materialized around him, all trapped in their childhood bodies but with eyes that had seen too much. They moved wrong like stop-motion animation, jerky and unnatural. "The carousel needs riders," they said in unison. "Permanent riders to keep the door open. In 1986, we were almost consumed, but we made a deal. Bring 7 others and we could leave. You're number 7, Marcus. When you ride, we'll finally be free." Marcus ran, but the park had changed. The paths that led out now curved back in. The fence he'd entered through was solid, unbroken. The carousel music grew louder, and he could hear something else. The sound of things moving through spaces that didn't quite exist in 3 dimensions. He found himself back at the carousel, the creatures now animate, reaching for him with appendages that shouldn't exist. The central creature had descended from its platform and stood waiting. This close, Marcus could see it wasn't carved at all. It was organic, alive, just frozen in wood-like stillness until needed. Every abandoned theme park is a feeding ground, Jennifer explained, her child voice horrifically calm. The joy and wonder create the initial crack, but it's the abandonment, the decay, the corruption of innocence that completes the ritual. Wonderland Park was the first successful breach, but there are others. Pripyat's amusement park, abandoned after Chernobyl. Takakanonoma, Greenland in Japan. Spree Park in Berlin. All doors, all hungry, all waiting. Marcus's camera was still recording, still live streaming to his channel. His followers were watching in horror as the impossible unfolded. The chat exploded with warnings, pleas for him to run, but also with something else, coordinates. Other urban explorers were posting locations of abandoned parks where they'd experienced similar things, where people had gone missing. The pattern was global. Every culture that built monuments to joy and then abandoned them had created these thin places. The Romans had their Colosseums, the Aztecs their ball courts, and modern humanity had its theme parks. All serving the same purpose, concentrating human emotion until reality grew thin enough for things to push through. The deal's simple, Jennifer continued. Ride the carousel willingly and you'll survive like we did. Refuse and it takes you anyway, but you don't come back. You become part of the park itself, another ghost powering the mechanism. Marcus looked at his camera, knowing thousands were watching. Don't come here, he said directly to the lens. Don't come to any of them. The urban exploration community, we've been mapping their feeding grounds for them. Every video, every photo, every visit feeds them. We thought we were documenting decay, but we were actually... The central creature moved faster than thought. One moment Marcus was speaking, the next he was on its back, his hands fused to its writhing surface. The carousel began to spin, reality blurring at its edges. Through the haze, Marcus could see beyond, a vast space full of impossible architecture, theme park rides that defied physics, and millions of trapped souls riding eternal attractions in a dimension where joy had been weaponized into horror. But something unexpected happened. The live stream didn't cut. The connection held across dimensions, broadcasting the truth to anyone watching. The comments section exploded as other urban explorers recognized places they'd been, rides they'd photographed. The abandoned Six Flags in New Orleans, Disney's River Country, the ruins of Joyland in Kansas, all were visible in that nightmare realm, all connected, all feeding the same hunger. Jennifer's expression changed from triumph to horror. You're still streaming? That's not possible. The technology shouldn't. She realized the truth at the same moment Marcus did. The thing beyond hadn't accounted for modern technology, for live streaming, for the interconnected nature of the digital age. Its feeding grounds were being exposed in real time to millions. The carousel spun faster, reality fracturing. Marcus felt himself being pulled into that other space, but he held his camera steady, documenting everything. The beings on the other side were vast, incomprehensible, but not invincible. They fed on isolated terror, on individual disappearances that could be explained away. Mass exposure was antithetical to their existence. Everyone watching, Marcus gasped, his body stretching between dimensions, spread this. Every abandoned park, every closed attraction, they're all connected. They feed on forgotten joy turned to fear. But if we remember, if we document, if we refuse to let them operate in shadow. The stream cut. Marcus's channel went dark. But it was too late. The video had been captured, downloaded, shared across platforms. Within hours, every major abandoned theme park on Earth had crowds gathering outside, not to explore but to witness, to document, to refuse to let the forgotten places fester in isolation. 3 days later, Marcus Webb walked out of Wonderland Park. He was changed. His eyes held depths that hadn't been there before, his shadow fell at wrong angles and electronics glitched in his presence. But he was alive and free. The 7 children from 1986 were gone, finally released from their 4-decade prison. The carousel still stands in Wonderland Park, but it no longer spins at night. The door is closed, sealed by the weight of collective observation. But Marcus knows, and now you know, that every abandoned place of joy is a potential breach. The beings on the other side are still hungry, still waiting. They've simply learned to be more careful, to choose locations not yet discovered by urban explorers, places where the digital eye hasn't yet penetrated. If you ever find yourself near an abandoned theme park and hear carousel music on the wind, remember this. You're not alone, you're never alone, and the things riding those rusted attractions have been waiting far longer than the parks have been closed. They're waiting for the world to forget, for the explorers to stop coming, for the cameras to turn away. Because in the dark, in the forgotten places where wonder went to die, something else was born. And it's still hungry. 3. Unsolved lighthouse disappearances. The Flannan Isles lighthouse stood against the North Atlantic storm like a lone candle in an infinite darkness. December 15, 1900, should have been routine, 3 keepers manning the light, keeping ships safe from the jagged teeth of the Seven Hunters Islands. But when the supply ship Hesperus arrived on December 26, they found the lighthouse door open, the beds unmade, and all 3 keepers, James Duckett, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur, gone without a trace. That's the story everyone knows. What they don't know is that the Flannan Isles weren't the first, and they certainly weren't the last. Dr. Elizabeth Cray had been researching lighthouse disappearances for 7 years when she noticed the pattern. A maritime historian by training, she'd stumbled onto the phenomenon while investigating insurance claims for Lloyd's of London. What started as a study of occupational hazards became something far more disturbing. Lighthouses are liminal spaces by nature, she explained to her research partner, David Sue, as their boat cut through rough seas toward Eilean Moor. They exist at the boundary between land and sea, light and dark, civilization and wilderness. But some of them exist at other boundaries too. The Flannan Isles case had all the classic hallmarks. The last entry in the lighthouse log, dated December 13th, described severe winds and storms, except the weather reports from the mainland showed calm seas. The log entries themselves grew increasingly strange. December 12th, gale north by northwest. Sea lashed to fury. Stormbound. Cannot go out. Ship passing sounding foghorn. Could see lights of cabins. Duckett irritable. December 13th, storm continued through night. Wind shifted west by north. Duckett quiet. Marshall praying. December 14th, gray daylight. Me, Duckett and Marshall prayed. December 15th, storm ended, sea calm. God is over all. But Dr. Cray had found something else in the Scottish Maritime Archives, something that had been deliberately misfiled. A 4th keeper's log hidden among unrelated shipping manifests. The handwriting matched none of the 3 known keepers. December 16th, they think I'm MacArthur. The resemblance is fortunate. The exchange was simpler than expected. The others suspect nothing yet. December 17th, Duckett keeps staring at me. He knows something is wrong but cannot articulate what. Marshall continues his prayers. If only he knew what listens. December 18th, the beacon must not fail. That is the imperative. The ships must be warned away, not guided in. What swims beneath these waters should not find the shore. The entries continued for days after the supposed disappearance. According to this log, someone or something had been posing as Donald MacArthur, maintaining the lighthouse while the real keepers were elsewhere. Dr. Cray's research revealed 17 similar cases across the globe. The Reef Island Light in Tasmania, 1913, 2 keepers vanished, but the light operated for 3 weeks on its own. The terrible Tilley Lighthouse off Oregon, 1943, 4 Coast Guard servicemen disappeared during a storm, yet passing ships reported seeing figures in the lighthouse for months afterward. The Jumentos Cays Light in the Bahamas, 1969, an entire family of 5 lighthouse keepers gone, but fresh food was found on the table and the radio was still warm. Each case shared specific details: logs describing impossible weather, mentions of unusual marine activity, and always reports of the lighthouse continuing to operate after the keepers vanished. David pulled up the sonar readings as they approached Eilean Moor. Elizabeth, look at this. The seafloor topology is all wrong. These trenches shouldn't exist here. The sonar showed deep chasms extending down from around the island, far deeper than any charts indicated. They formed a pattern, 7 trenches radiating out like the spokes of a wheel, with the lighthouse at the hub. They moored at the same landing where the Hesperus had anchored 123 years ago. The lighthouse, now automated, still functioned, its beam cutting through the gathering dusk. But as they climbed the steps carved into the rock, Elizabeth noticed something odd. There were too many steps. The historical records clearly stated there were 103 steps to the lighthouse. She counted 147. Inside the lighthouse, they found the original keeper's quarters preserved as a historical site. But the automation equipment was wrong. The machinery was decades more advanced than what should have been installed, with components that didn't match any manufacturer Elizabeth knew. David, when was this lighthouse automated? 1971, according to the records. Elizabeth ran her hand along a control panel. This technology didn't exist in 1971. Some of it doesn't exist now. That's when they found the second log room, hidden behind what appeared to be solid stone but was actually a carefully crafted door. Inside were hundreds of logbooks, dating back not to 1900, but to 1794, a full century before the lighthouse was supposedly built. The entries were in various hands, various languages, some in scripts Elizabeth couldn't identify. But the ones in English told a horrifying story. 1794, the structure manifests regardless of our intentions. We build, it rebuilds. We abandon, it maintains. The light must not fail. 1823, new keepers arrived, believing themselves the first. We who remain hidden guide their hands, ensure the ritual continues. They perform the duties without understanding their true purpose. 1847, the exchange grows easier with practice. Their faces become ours, our purpose becomes theirs. The boundary thins with each passing. 1876, the things that swim in the deep grow restless. The light barely holds them. Soon, stronger measures will be necessary. 1889, we have made contact with the other stations. 17 points of light holding back the dark. If even one fails, all fail. 1900, the three have been chosen. Duckett's sensitivity to the deep, Marshall's faith as an anchor, MacArthur's bloodline connection. They will serve better from the other side. Elizabeth photographed everything, her hands shaking. The implications were staggering. Lighthouses weren't just navigation aids, they were a containment system holding something in the ocean depths. David's voice crackled over the radio from outside. Elizabeth, you need to see this. Now. She found him at the edge of the island, staring down at the water. The sea was calm, but there were lights beneath the surface. Not reflections, actual lights, geometric patterns that pulsed in sequence with the lighthouse beam. It's responding, David whispered. The lighthouse sends a signal down, and something signals back. They watched in horrified fascination as the lights below formed shapes, tentacles or tendrils of bioluminescence, but ordered, intelligent. They moved in patterns that resembled mathematical equations, star charts, or perhaps a language older than human speech. Elizabeth checked her equipment. The electromagnetic readings were off the charts. The lighthouse wasn't just shining light outward. It was projecting something downward, into those impossible trenches. A barrier made of more than photons. That night, they set up camp in the keeper's quarters, determined to observe a full cycle. At exactly 3:33 a.m., Elizabeth woke to find David standing at the window, staring out at the beacon. David? He didn't respond. His eyes reflected the lighthouse beam in a way that human eyes shouldn't. When she touched his shoulder, his skin was cold as ocean water. They're here, he said in a voice that wasn't quite his. The keepers, all of them. They never left, Elizabeth. They became part of the mechanism. The room temperature plummeted. In the corners where shadow met shadow, figures began to emerge. Not quite human anymore, translucent and wrong, wearing the uniforms of different eras. Duckett, Marshall, and MacArthur were among them, but there were dozens of others. The deep ones require payment. They spoke in unison, their voices layered like echo upon echo. Every lighthouse keeper becomes part of the eternal watch. We maintain the barrier between what swims below and what walks above. Elizabeth saw the truth then. The lighthouse keepers hadn't disappeared, they'd been transformed, incorporated into the lighthouse itself. Their consciousness powered the barrier, their essence became part of the light that held back whatever lurked in those trenches. She ran for the hidden log room, desperate for answers. The final volume, the one still being written, was open on the desk. Fresh ink spelled out words as she watched. Dr. Elizabeth Cray arrives as foretold. The bloodline returns. Your grandmother, Sarah Cray, was keeper at Bishop Rock Lighthouse, 1952. She never left. She sent you dreams, guided your research, brought you here. The exchange is not random. It follows the blood. Elizabeth's mind reeled. Her grandmother had supposedly died in a boating accident, but her body was never found. She'd been the first female lighthouse keeper at Bishop Rock, a position she'd held for only 3 months before her disappearance. The possessed David appeared in the doorway. Every family touched by the lighthouses is marked. You've all felt the call. The fascination with the sea, the dreams of lights beneath the water, the compulsion to return. Your research wasn't curiosity, Elizabeth. It was summoning. She grabbed the most recent logbooks and ran, but the lighthouse had become a maze. Stairs that hadn't existed before spiraled up and down. Rooms opened onto other rooms that couldn't occupy the same space. The geometry was wrong, as if the lighthouse existed in more dimensions than 3. In what should have been the lamp room, she found something else entirely. A vast chamber that couldn't fit within the lighthouse's physical structure. At its center was the real light source. Not a lens or a bulb, but a sphere of something that hurt to perceive directly. It pulsed with the heartbeat of every keeper who'd ever been absorbed, and within it she could see them, suspended like insects in amber. The lighthouses were built on intersection points, the David thing explained, following her calmly. Places where our reality touches others. The things in the deep aren't from our ocean, they're from the spaces between spaces trying to break through. The lighthouses are pins holding the fabric of reality in place. Elizabeth watched in horror as her own hand began to turn translucent. The change had already started. She'd been marked from birth, destined to join the eternal watch. But why the deception? She gasped, fighting the transformation. Why hide it? Because humanity would try to help. They'd investigate, interfere, attempt rescues. They'd break the containment trying to save us. The mystery must remain. The disappeared must stay disappeared. That is the price of keeping the darkness at bay. Elizabeth felt her consciousness expanding, touching the minds of lighthouse keepers across the globe. She could sense her grandmother at Bishop Rock, still maintaining her watch after 70 years. She felt the keepers at the Reef Island Light, the terrible Tilly, all of them connected in a network of sentinel souls. But she also felt something else, the things pressing against the barrier from below. They were vast, ancient, and patient. They'd been trying to break through since before humans walked upright, and the lighthouses were just the latest in a long line of defenses. Stone circles, pyramids, temples, all had served the same purpose in their time. The automation of lighthouses, she realized with dawning horror, it's weakening the barrier. Yes, the collective voice of the keepers confirmed. Machines can maintain the physical light, but not the metaphysical barrier. We need living souls to power the true defense. And we're running out. Elizabeth made a desperate choice. She pulled out her satellite phone, still functioning despite the electromagnetic interference, and called her research institute. The call connected to her assistant, Maria. Maria, listen carefully. Everything I'm about to tell you sounds insane, but you need to publish it all. The lighthouse disappearances, they're not. The phone dissolved in her hand like water. The David thing shook its head sadly. The knowledge cannot spread. That too would break the containment. Curiosity draws people here, and we need them to come, but only the marked ones, only those who can serve. Elizabeth's transformation accelerated. She could feel herself becoming part of the lighthouse, her memories merging with centuries of keepers. But she fought to retain enough of herself to write one last entry in the log. December 15, 2023, Dr. Elizabeth Cray, final entry. The Flannan Isles Lighthouse is a prison and a fortress. We are both prisoners and guards. The disappeared keep watch so the rest can sleep unknowing. If you find this, if you're reading this, you're already marked. The dreams brought you here. The bloodline calls you home. Don't fight it. The alternative is so much worse. As her physical form dissolved into light, Elizabeth saw the truth of the deep. The things waiting below weren't monsters. They were refugees, fleeing something even worse in their own dimension. The lighthouses didn't keep them in. They kept them out, preventing them from entering our reality and bringing their pursuers with them. The eternal paradox. The lighthouse keepers had to disappear to save the world, but the world could never know they'd been saved. Every missing keeper was a hero whose sacrifice could never be acknowledged, whose story could never be told. 3 weeks later, the supply boat arrived at Eilean Moor to check on the automated systems. They found Dr. Elizabeth Cray and David Sue's equipment neatly packed, their boat still moored, but no sign of the researchers themselves. The official report cited a rogue wave, bodies swept out to sea. But the lighthouse keeper at Strathy Point, 50 miles away on the Scottish mainland, reported something strange that night. He'd seen the Flannan light pulse in a pattern that wasn't part of its normal sequence. When he recorded it and played it back slowly, it sounded almost like voices, 2 new voices added to a chorus that had been singing for over a century. The lighthouse continues its vigil. Ships pass safely, unaware that beneath them, in trenches that shouldn't exist, things that shouldn't be, wait and watch. And in lighthouses around the world, the disappeared keep their eternal watch, maintaining barriers that must never fall. If you've ever felt drawn to lighthouses, if you've dreamed of lights beneath the water, if your family has a history of maritime service, stop. Don't research further. Don't visit that lighthouse that calls to you. The marked bloodlines are growing thin, and the barriers are weakening. But if you wake at 3:33 a.m. to find yourself staring at the sea, if you can hear the foghorn calling your name, if your hands have started to look translucent in lighthouse beams, then you already know. You've always known. The light must not fail. The watch must continue. And sometimes, to save everyone, someone has to disappear. For the dark history of plague doctor masks. The year was 1348, and death had come to Venice in the form of black boils and fevered dreams. The plague doctors walked the putrid streets in their distinctive beaked masks, looking more like harbingers of doom than healers. But Giorgio Valetti knew something the others didn't. The masks weren't designed to protect the doctors from the plague. They were designed to protect everyone else from what the doctors had become. This truth had been hidden for nearly 7 centuries, buried in Vatican archives and dismissed as medieval superstition. Until Dr. Sarah Chin, a medical historian at Johns Hopkins, discovered a series of manuscripts that should never have survived the various purges of heretical medical texts. The first manuscript, written in a mixture of Latin and a dialect that predated known Italian, described the true origin of the plague doctor mask. It wasn't invented by Charles de Lorme in 1619 as history claimed. The design was far older, found carved in Roman catacombs and described in Byzantine medical texts that referred to the bearers of the black sight. The beak holds not herbs for the purification of air, the manuscript read, but restraints for that which grows within. The eye coverings are not glass but obsidian, for normal sight must be obscured lest the transformation accelerate. The leather must be thick, not to prevent disease from entering, but to prevent the bearer from escaping. Dr. Chen's research partner, Marcus Webb, who had survived his own encounter with otherworldly forces at an abandoned theme park, helped her track down supporting evidence across Europe. They found records of plague doctors who had served for decades without aging, of villages that feared their healers more than the disease itself, and most disturbing, of plague outbreaks that followed specific patterns that suggested intelligence rather than natural transmission. In Prague, they discovered the journal of Jan Cerny, a plague doctor from 1380. His entries started normally enough, describing treatments and patient outcomes. But as the months progressed, the writing changed. Day 47 of wearing the mask. The herbs have rotted, yet I smell only sweetness. The patients fear me now, crossing themselves when I pass. I tell them it is superstition, but I too feel the change. My fingers grow long, too long for my gloves. My neck extends, filling the mask's beak. Day 92, I no longer remove the mask. Beneath it, I am no longer what I was. The plague speaks to me, tells me where to go, whom to visit. Those I touch either die or transform. There is no healing here, only selection. Day 130, others like me gather at night. We do not speak, we no longer can, but we understand. The plague is not a disease. It is a chrysalis. We are becoming something new, something necessary. The mask is not a costume. It is our true face emerging. The Vatican's secret medical archives, accessed through a contact who insisted on anonymity, revealed even more disturbing information. During major plague outbreaks, the Church had deployed special units called the Sanctified Purgers to hunt and eliminate plague doctors who had undergone the metamorphosis. These hunters reported finding doctors whose bodies had mutated to match their masks, beaks of hardened bone protruding from their faces, eyes that had become compound like an insect's, bodies elongated and twisted. But the most terrifying discovery came from a monastery in southern France. Brother Thomas, writing in 1351, described witnessing the transformation of a plague doctor firsthand. Brother Philippe volunteered to serve the sick, donning the cursed mask as was required. For weeks he tended to the dying with compassion. But I watched him change. First, his gait became bird-like, his head tilting at impossible angles. Then his hands, oh merciful God, his hands grew fingers that bent backward, that could reach through a patient's flesh without breaking the skin. By the 40th night, he no longer returned to the monastery. I followed him to the charnel house where he stood among the corpses, his beak mask opening like a maw. From within came not a human face but something that pulsed with diseased light. He was feeding, not on flesh but on the very essence of plague itself. The disease wasn't killing people, it was preparing them, softening their souls for harvest. Dr. Chen realized that every major plague outbreak in history coincided with reports of plague doctors exhibiting inhuman behavior. The Black Death, the Great Plague of London, the third pandemic, each time the doctors appeared, transformed, and then vanished when the plague receded, only to reappear decades later when disease struck again. In Venice, she found the workshop of Alessandro Moretti, the mask maker who had supposedly crafted the first plague doctor masks. His descendants still operated the shop, selling replicas to tourists. But in the basement, behind a wall that hadn't been opened in centuries, Chen and Webb found the originals. These weren't masks, they were cocoons. Each one was organic, grown rather than crafted, with veins of black running through what looked like leather but pulsed with residual life. Inside one, they found human teeth embedded in patterns, fingernails woven into the fabric, and at the center of the beak, a small organ that resembled nothing in human anatomy. The elderly shop owner, upon seeing what they'd found, broke down. His family had been the keepers of this secret for 23 generations. "We were cursed to guard them," he whispered, "to ensure they never were worn again. But also to preserve them for the day when they would be needed." "Needed for what?" Chen asked. "For when the true plague returns. Not the bacterial infection you know as plague, but the thing that rides within it." The doctors weren't treating the Black Death. They were containing something worse, something that used the disease as a doorway into our world. The manuscripts called it the crawling corruption, an entity or force that existed between life and death, feeding on the transition between the two states. Plague created the perfect feeding ground, millions dying slowly, their life force depleting gradually, creating a feast for something that existed in the spaces between heartbeats. The plague doctors, the manuscripts revealed, were humanity's antibodies. The masks didn't transform them into monsters. They revealed what certain bloodlines already carried within them. These families had been infected with something during the first outbreak, something that made them natural enemies of the crawling corruption. When they put on the masks, their dormant nature awakened, and they became hunters of a different sort. They didn't treat the sick, the shop owner explained. They identified those who were becoming vessels for the corruption and eliminated them before the entity could fully manifest. The beak masks allowed them to smell the taint, to see the infection that was more than physical. But the cost was their humanity. Chen found supporting evidence in modern medical anomalies. Certain families across Europe showed genetic markers that didn't match human norms, extra chromosomes that should have been fatal but weren't, organ structures that served no apparent purpose, immune systems that reacted to stimuli that didn't exist in nature. These families all traced their lineages back to plague doctors. Webb's investigation took a darker turn when he discovered that several modern pharmaceutical companies had been collecting DNA samples from these bloodlines. Internal documents, leaked by a whistleblower, revealed Project Corvus, an attempt to synthesize the transformation, to create modern plague doctors for what they termed the coming biocrisis. The documents included photographs from testing facilities. Volunteers who had been injected with the synthesized compound and made to wear reconstructed plague doctor masks. The images showed the progression over weeks. Bodies elongating, faces pushing forward into beaks, fingers becoming talons. But unlike the historical transformations, these subjects retained their human consciousness, trapped in bodies that were no longer their own. One test subject's journal was particularly haunting. Day 12, "I can smell disease now. Not just COVID or flu, I can smell cancer, depression, anxiety. Mental illness has a scent. Dying souls taste purple." Day 23, The mask won't come off anymore. It's fused with my skull. But I can see things, dark shapes feeding on the sick in the hospital ward. They've always been there, we just couldn't perceive them before. Day 34. I understand now. The plague doctors weren't monsters. They were prison guards. The plague wasn't the enemy, it was bait, drawing out the real infection. And it's still here, still feeding, just more subtle now. Every hospital, every nursing home, every place where death congregates, they're there. Feeding. Day 45. I killed one today. My hands went through its shadow body and pulled out something that screamed. The dying patients in the ward. Some of them got better. Not all, but some. The ones who were being fed upon. I saved them. But what I'm becoming. I won't be able to write much longer. My fingers are changing too much. The project was shut down after an incident at the testing facility. All 12 test subjects had broken containment simultaneously, moving in perfect coordination despite being in separate wings. Security footage showed them converging on a specific room, the morgue. What they did there was classified, but the facility was evacuated and remains sealed. Chen and Webb's investigation led them to a terrifying conclusion. The plague outbreaks throughout history weren't random. They were hunting seasons. The crawling corruption would manifest, the plague doctors would arise to combat it, and the cycle would repeat. But modern medicine had disrupted this cycle. Antibiotics and vaccines had prevented the mass deaths that once drew out the corruption, forcing it to adapt, to become more subtle. Now it fed slowly, patiently, in hospitals and care facilities, in places where death was prolonged and suffering extended. And without plague doctors to hunt it, it was growing stronger. The final piece of evidence came from an unexpected source, a modern plague doctor who reached out to Chen directly. He wouldn't give his name, only calling himself Corvus, but he claimed to be part of an unbroken line of plague doctors who had never stopped their work. "We still exist," he told her in a voice distorted by what sounded like a respirator but might have been something else. "Hidden, hunting, holding the line. But there are so few of us now. The bloodlines are diluted, the masks destroyed or locked away, and the enemy has evolved." He provided Chen with video footage from a hospital in Romania. Through what appeared to be modified security cameras, she could see things that shouldn't exist. Shadow entities attached to patients, feeding tubes of darkness extending from the dying to something vast and unseen. And moving among them, a figure in a modernized plague doctor outfit, its movements bird-like and wrong, systematically severing these connections. This is happening in every hospital, every hospice, every place where death lingers, Corvus explained. The plague doctors of old at least had the disease to mark their targets. Now we must hunt blindly, finding the infected among millions. And each time we reveal ourselves, humanity recoils in fear, not understanding that we're the only thing standing between them and something far worse. Chen's research was terminated when the CDC classified her findings as a potential public health hazard. Her papers were confiscated, her lab sealed. But not before she had made copies, hidden them, ensuring the knowledge wouldn't be lost again. The truth about plague doctor masks is this: they were never meant to protect against plague. They were transformation devices, tools that awaken dormant genetics in certain bloodlines, turning humans into something capable of fighting an enemy we couldn't otherwise perceive. The doctors didn't disappear when the plagues ended. They went underground, continuing their eternal hunt. And now, as new diseases emerge with increasing frequency, as mortality rates climb in ways that statistics can't quite explain, as people report strange dreams of beaked figures standing at their bedsides, the masks are returning. Hidden in medical facilities, worn by what authorities dismiss as copycat killers or delusional individuals, the plague doctors continue their work. If you've ever felt an inexplicable revulsion at the sight of a plague doctor mask, if your family history includes ancestors who served during plague outbreaks, if you've noticed that sick relatives recovered unexpectedly after reporting nightmares of bird-like creatures, you might carry the bloodline. And someday, when the crawling corruption grows bold enough to manifest openly again, you might find yourself called to don the mask, to undergo the transformation, to become humanity's immune response to a disease that isn't quite a disease. The masks wait in hidden workshops, in museum basements, and private collections. They pulse with patient life, knowing their time is coming again. Because the plague never really ended, it just learned to hide better. And the doctors never stopped hunting. They just learned to hide better too. 5. Real 911 calls that still haunt dispatchers. Catherine Mills had been a 911 dispatcher for 15 years when she took the call that would change everything. It was 2:47 a.m. on a Thursday in Portland, Oregon, and she thought she'd heard every type of emergency. She was wrong. 911, what's your emergency? The voice on the other end was a child, maybe 8 or 9, speaking in a whisper. The man who lives in our walls says you can't help me. Catherine's training kicked in. Sweetie, where are you? Are you in danger? I'm at 447 Riverside Drive. But you've already been here 3 times. You never find him because he's not really in the walls. He's in the space between the walls. Catherine pulled up the address. There had been 3 calls from that location in the past month, all reporting intruders. Officers had responded each time, found nothing, and ultimately dismissed it as a prank or mental health issue. But this was the first time a child had called. What's your name, honey? Emma. Emma Patterson. I'm 8. The man in the wall says you won't believe me either. He says adults can't see him because they don't remember how to look in the between spaces. Catherine was typing rapidly, dispatching units while keeping Emma on the line. Emma, are your parents home? They're asleep. The man in the walls makes them sleep when he wants to talk to me. He says he's been in lots of houses talking to lots of kids. He says you have recordings of us calling, but you marked them as false reports. A chill ran down Catherine's spine. She pulled up the database of recent calls involving children reporting intruders. There were dozens spread across the city, all ultimately classified as unfounded. But the addresses, they formed a pattern. A perfect spiral, centering on an old building downtown that had been demolished in the 1960s. Emma, can you describe the man? He doesn't look like a man exactly. He's stretched like someone pulled him through a narrow space and he got stuck that way. His fingers are really long, they can reach through electrical outlets. And his face is always sideways like he's peeking around a corner even when he's standing straight. Officers arrived at the Patterson house. Catherine listened as they conducted their search, heard them report finding nothing unusual, heard them trying to wake the parents who seemed unusually difficult to rouse. Then she heard something else, a sound like static but with a pattern to it. It was coming through Emma's phone but also, impossibly, through the officers' radios. He's laughing, Emma whispered. He says this is his favorite game. He says you've been playing it for years without knowing. Every child who calls about monsters, about things in their closets, about people who aren't there, he says you have hundreds of recordings. He says if you listen to them all together, in order, they tell a story. Catherine did something she wasn't supposed to do. She started pulling those recordings, the ones marked as false alarms, pranks, or psychological issues. She sorted them chronologically and began playing them simultaneously, each at a low volume. The overlapping voices of frightened children created a white noise at first. But then patterns emerged. Words repeated across different calls, from different children who couldn't have known each other, the between spaces. He's getting stronger. The old building is gone but the door is still there. He collects children's fears. One call from 6 months ago made Catherine's blood freeze. A boy named Timothy had said, he told me about the dispatcher who would finally listen. He said her name would be Catherine. She'd never taken that call. It had been handled by her colleague Robert, who'd noted it as a probable prank. But the child had known her name 6 months before this moment. Emma's voice brought her back. He wants me to tell you something. He says on November 15, 1963, there was a fire at the Riverside Children's Hospital. 17 children died. But that's not true. They didn't die. They went into the between spaces. And they're still there, still calling for help, but you can't hear them because they're calling from places that don't exist. Catherine looked up the date. November 15, 1963, was indeed when a fire had destroyed a children's hospital, at the exact location that was now the center of the spiral pattern of calls. The official death toll was 17 children. He says if you check your recordings from that night, you'll hear them. The original calls. But not from 1963, from every year since, on the same date at the same time. 2:47 a.m. Catherine's hands shook as she pulled up the archives. November 15th, every year, 2:47 a.m. There they were, calls that had been classified as technical glitches, dead air, or static. But when she enhanced the audio, children's voices, faint but unmistakable, giving the same address that no longer existed, reporting a fire that had ended decades ago, begging for help that never came. Emma, I need you to get out of the house. Can you get to your parents' room? He won't let me. He says I have to finish delivering his message first. He says you need to understand that every child who's ever called you about monsters was telling the truth. Every single one. And you marked them as false reports. You sent them back to their monsters thinking they were safe. Catherine heard footsteps on Emma's end, not the heavy tread of adults or the light patter of a child, but something that dragged and clicked at the same time. He's coming closer, Emma whispered. He wants to talk to you directly. The voice that came through next shouldn't have been able to exist. It sounded like multiple people speaking from different distances, all saying the same words but slightly out of sync. Catherine Mills, you've been chosen to bear witness. Every dispatcher in every city has calls like these, dismissed and forgotten. We live in the spaces between spaces, the places your world forgot to account for. We've been collecting the children who can see us, one by one, call by call. Check your databases. Check how many of those children who called about monsters later went missing. Not immediately, we're patient. But eventually they all come to the between spaces. Catherine's fingers flew across her keyboard, cross-referencing the false alarm calls with missing children reports. The correlation was staggering. 73% of children who'd called 911 reporting impossible intruders had gone missing within 5 years of their calls. Why? Catherine managed to ask. Because children still remember how to see what doesn't fit. Adults explain it away, rationalize it, file it under unfounded. But we're here, in every wall, in every shadow that falls wrong, in every corner that has one too many angles. And when children call for help and no one believes them, they lose their anchor to your world. They become ours. Emma's voice returned, but it sounded different now, hollow. He says to check on me tomorrow. The officers will find an empty house. They'll say we moved away months ago. But that's not true. We'll have moved sideways into the between spaces. And I'll still be calling 911, but you won't be able to hear me anymore. I'll be with the other children, the ones from the hospital, the ones from all the dismissed calls. The line went dead. Catherine immediately dispatched additional units, called her supervisor, demanded action. But when officers arrived, even though it had been only minutes, the Patterson house was empty. Not just unoccupied, abandoned. Dust covered everything, newspapers from months ago sat on the porch. The neighbors swore the family had moved away in July. But Catherine had the recording. She had Emma's voice, the timestamp, the dispatcher log showing units had responded to an occupied house just minutes before. The paradox broke something in the official response. An investigation was launched. What they found in the 911 archives nationwide was horrifying. Thousands of calls, all following similar patterns. Children reporting beings that couldn't exist, giving details that were too consistent to be imagination. And a shocking number of these children later vanishing without explanation. The cases were never connected because the calls had been dismissed, filed away as false reports or psychological issues. Catherine discovered that other dispatchers had noticed patterns too. Maria Rodriguez in Phoenix had a collection of 47 calls about the backwards man who walked on ceilings. James Chin in Seattle had logged dozens of reports about the lady who lives in mirrors and steals faces. Sarah Williams in Atlanta had recordings of children describing the thing that pretends to be your shadow but has too many arms. They formed an unofficial network, sharing recordings, comparing notes. The entities the children described varied regionally but shared characteristics. They existed in spaces that shouldn't be there, they targeted children who could perceive them, and they all seemed to be growing bolder. The breaking point came when Catherine received a call from a number that shouldn't exist. The area code was 000, the number all zeros except for the date, November 15, 1963. Hello, Catherine. It was Emma's voice, but older somehow. I'm calling from the between spaces now. We all are. All the children from all the dismissed calls. We're not missing, we're just somewhere you can't reach. The man in the walls wants you to know something. We're coming back. All of us. On the anniversary of the fire. But we won't be the same. Catherine tried to trace the call. The signal went to the demolished hospital site, but there was nothing there, just an empty lot that city records showed had never been developed, despite photographic evidence of the hospital's existence. More calls came through that night, all from impossible numbers, all from children who'd been marked as missing or run away over the decades. Timothy Johnson, age 10, called September 3, 2019 about the thing in his closet. You sent officers who found nothing. I disappeared 2 weeks later. Ashley Brown, age 7, called June 15, 2021, about voices in the vents. Dismissed as imagination. I've been in the between spaces for 2 years now. Marcus Lee, age 9, called October 22, 2018, about the woman who walked through walls. Tagged as mental health issue. She took me through the walls with her. Each child gave their original case number, their call timestamp, and the name of the dispatcher who hadn't believed them. The guilt was overwhelming. The system had failed these children systematically, dismissing their cries for help as fantasies. Catherine's research revealed that the phenomenon wasn't new. Going back through historical records, she found similar patterns in telegraph reports, in early police logs, even in church records from centuries past. Children reporting beings that didn't fit reality, adults dismissing them, children vanishing. The only difference now was that 911 calls created a record that couldn't be destroyed or forgotten. The date approached, November 15th, the anniversary of the hospital fire. Dispatchers across the country reported increasing call volumes from children, all reporting escalating encounters with impossible intruders. But now, armed with Catherine's research, they responded differently. They believed, but it might have been too late. On November 14th, Catherine received one final call from Emma. It's almost time. The man in the wall says thank you for finally listening, but listening isn't enough anymore. We've been changed by the between spaces. We can't come back as we were. Tomorrow at 2:47 a.m., all the dismissed children will return. But we'll be like them now, stretched sideways wrong. We'll live in the spaces between spaces and we'll be looking for new children to join us. Children who call for help that doesn't come. Emma, there has to be another way. There is. Believe the children. Every call, every report, every monster in every closet. Believe them all. Send help, real help, not officers who look in the normal places. Send people who remember how to see the way children see. Or more of us will go sideways into the between spaces, where the things that shouldn't exist are the only things that do. The line went dead. Catherine looked at the clock. November 14th, 11:58 p.m. In less than 3 hours they would know if Emma's warning was real. Across the country, dispatchers waited, hoping they had misunderstood, that it was an elaborate hoax. But at exactly 2:47 a.m. on November 15th, every 911 center in the nation received simultaneous calls. Thousands of them. All from children who had been declared missing over the past decades. But the children who spoke weren't asking for help anymore. They were offering invitations. Come play in the between spaces, they said in unison, their voices distorted and multiplied. Come see what you missed when you didn't believe us. Come meet the things that took us when you wouldn't listen. And in homes across the country, children who had recently called 911 about monsters began disappearing, walking into walls, stepping into shadows, following things only they could see. The dismissals had created a pipeline, and now it was flowing freely. Catherine Mills quit her job the next day, but she didn't stop working. She founded the Believing Response Unit, training first responders to take every child's call seriously, no matter how impossible it seemed. Because she had learned the hardest truth of all. The monsters were never the real danger. The real danger was in not believing they were there. And somewhere in the spaces between spaces, Emma Patterson and thousands of other children wait, changed and lost, calling for help on frequencies that human ears can no longer hear, warning about dangers that human eyes can no longer see. The calls continue. Every night in every city. The question is, who's still listening? And more importantly, who believes? 6. Cursed film sets. Movies where cast members died. The film reel shouldn't have existed. It was found in a storage unit in Burbank, California, in 2019, wrapped in what looked like human hair and sealed with wax that forensics later identified as mixed with blood. The label, written in multiple languages layered over each other, simply read, "The final cut, all films are one film." Marcus Reed, a film archivist at the Academy Museum, was tasked with reviewing and cataloging the discovery. What he found would connect seemingly unrelated film tragedies across a century of cinema and reveal that Hollywood's darkest secret wasn't scandal or murder. It was something far more ancient and deliberate. The reel contained spliced-together footage from dozens of films, all infamous for their cursed productions. But this wasn't released footage. These were moments that should never have been captured, scenes filmed after the cameras had supposedly stopped rolling, images that showed what really happened when cast members died. The first segment was from The Conqueror, 1956, the John Wayne film where 91 of the 220 cast and crew members developed cancer. The official story blamed nuclear test site contamination. But the recovered footage showed something else. A ritual performed before filming began, executives in robes standing in a circle, and at the center, something that hurt to look at directly, a shape that seemed to exist in more dimensions than film could capture. Wayne's voice recorded off camera. "What did we agree to? What did you make us sign?" An unidentified voice responding, "The same contract every star signs, Mr. Wayne. Fame eternal but flesh temporary. The audience feeds and we feed through the audience." Marcus paused the reel, his hands shaking. He'd heard rumors about the real contracts that stars signed, always dismissed as conspiracy theories. But here was evidence, visual proof that something else was happening on these sets. The next segment, The Crow, 1993. Brandon Lee's death, officially caused by a prop gun accident. But this footage, filmed by what appeared to be a hidden camera, showed the truth. The gun had been loaded correctly with blanks. It was what emerged from the gun that killed Lee. Something that looked like a shadow-given substance, reaching into his chest and pulling out something that glowed before disappearing into the film itself. Lee's last words, captured on this hidden audio, "I can see it now. The thing that watches through every camera. It's been feeding on us since the first picture show." Marcus researched the locations, the dates, the patterns. Every cursed film had certain elements in common. They were all shot on lots or locations that had been used for multiple productions. They all involved scenes depicting death or transformation, and they all had moments where reality seemed to blur with fiction. Poltergeist, 1982. The footage showed Heather O'Rourke not just acting but actually being pulled into something beyond the screen. The special effects team frantically trying to reverse what they'd accidentally summoned. The little girl aging rapidly in moments before returning to normal but changed, marked. She would die 6 years later, but the footage suggested she'd already been claimed during filming. The recovered reel included a recording from a production meeting for The Exorcist, 1973. "The entity is real," director William Friedkin's voice, though he'd always publicly denied believing in the supernatural. "It's been here since we started filming. The fire, the deaths, Vasiliki and Jack. It's taking payment for what we're showing the world." "Then we stopped filming," another voice suggested. "We can't stop. Don't you understand? Once you start one of these films, you have to finish it. The contract isn't with the studio, it's with something that exists in the space between the frame and the screen. If we stop, it takes everyone, not just the offerings." Marcus found references to offerings throughout the footage. Each cursed production had selected certain cast or crew members as offerings before filming began. Their names were written in scripts using special ink, their scenes filmed with specific cameras, their deaths orchestrated to look like accidents but actually serving as payment for the film's success. The Twilight Zone, the movie, 1982, segment was the most disturbing. The helicopter crash that killed Vic Morrow and 2 children was shown from multiple angles, including impossible ones, from inside the helicopter blades, from beneath the water, from inside Morrow's eyes. And in each angle, something was visible that shouldn't have been there. Figures in ancient dress, watching, recording with devices that weren't cameras but served the same purpose. A voiceover, source unknown, every death on a film set is recorded twice, once by our cameras, once by theirs. They've been documenting human suffering through performance since the first Passion plays, the first staged crucifixions. Cinema just made it more efficient. Marcus discovered that the cursed films weren't random, they were connected by their use of specific equipment. Certain cameras, lights, and props had been passed from production to production for decades. Each piece carried something with it, a residue that accumulated with every death, every tragedy. He tracked down one of these cameras, used in the filming of The Omen, 1976, The Amityville Horror, 1979, and A Tuck, unreleased. Inside its mechanisms, he found symbols etched into the metal, not scratched but grown, as if the metal had reorganized itself into these patterns. The symbols matched those found in pre-Columbian temples dedicated to gods that demanded performance sacrifices. The most revealing footage came from Rosemary's Baby, 1968. After composer Christoph Kamada's death, someone had kept filming. The footage showed Kamada at his piano, playing, but his hands were moving wrong, too many fingers, joints bending in impossible directions. He was composing something, a piece of music that the footage captured but that hurt to hear, frequencies that human ears weren't meant to process. Roman Polanski's voice off camera, "The music opens doors. Every film that uses these notes, these frequencies, becomes a window. The audience doesn't just watch, they participate in the ritual without knowing." Marcus analyzed the audio from dozens of films. Hidden in the soundtracks, buried beneath dialogue and sound effects, were consistent frequencies. The same notes Kamada had been playing in his transformed state. These frequencies appeared in every cursed film, sometimes as background music, sometimes as ambient noise, but always there. The pattern became clear. Films weren't just entertainment. They were mass rituals with the audience as unwitting participants. Every viewing fed something, and certain films, the cursed ones, were designed to feed it more efficiently. The deaths weren't side effects, they were the point. The final segment of the reel was labeled simply, "The Truth." It showed a meeting in 1913 before Hollywood was Hollywood. Early film pioneers gathering with figures whose faces were deliberately obscured. They were making a deal. "You give us the technology to capture and display moving images that will captivate millions," one of the pioneers said. "And in return," the obscured figure replied, its voice like multiple people speaking through water, "you give us access to those millions. Every eye that watches becomes ours for that moment. Every emotional response feeds us. And occasionally we take one of the performers as immediate payment." How occasionally? That depends on how much power you want your images to have. The more impact, the more influence, the higher the price. Some films will demand nothing. Others will consume entire casts. Marcus realized he was looking at the foundational contract of Hollywood itself. The entire industry was built on this agreement, this exchange of human lives for the power to influence millions through moving images. He found modern evidence too. Digital films weren't exempt. The Dark Knight, 2008. Heath Ledger's death wasn't an overdose but a consumption, his method acting opening him too fully to something that used the character of the Joker as a vessel. The footage showed Ledger in his apartment, but he wasn't alone. Something was there, speaking through him, writing in his journal with his hands but not his consciousness. Deadpool 2, 2018. Ajoy Harris's motorcycle stunt death was preceded by footage of the bike itself transforming briefly into something organic, something that had too many wheels, that moved through dimensions the camera couldn't fully capture. Even animated films weren't safe. Several Pixar and Disney animators had died during production of major films, and the recovered footage showed why. The characters were becoming real, stepping out of screens, existing in the space between digital and physical. The animators who saw them fully, who interacted with them, paid the price for breaking the boundary between creation and creator. Marcus compiled everything into a report, but before he could submit it, he was contacted by someone claiming to be from the management, not studio management but something older. "Mr. Reed," the voice on the phone was pleasant but wrong, like AI trained on human speech but missing crucial elements. "You've seen what you weren't meant to see. We can offer you two choices. Join us, become part of the system, help us manage the exchanges, or become an offering yourself. There has to be another way. There is no other way. Cinema is a contract written in light and shadow, signed by every viewer, sealed by every death. You cannot expose this without destroying the entire industry, and with it, the barrier that keeps us contained to screens. Would you rather we walked freely in your world?" Marcus made his choice. He leaked everything online, but with a crucial addition, he included instructions for breaking the contract. Every cursed film had counter frequencies, notes that could disrupt the feeding. If played during viewing, they would sever the connection between audience and the entities feeding through the screen. The response was immediate. Films began failing worldwide. Projectors malfunctioned, digital files corrupted, streaming services crashed. But it was too late, the information was out. The cursed films fought back. People who downloaded Marcus's data reported seeing figures stepping out of their screens, cast members from dead productions appearing in their homes. The boundary between film and reality was breaking down, just as the management had warned. But something unexpected happened. The newer generation, raised on interactive media and virtual reality, could see these entities clearly and weren't afraid. They treated them like glitches, bugs to be patched. They started creating their own films, using the counter-frequencies as soundtracks, filming the entities directly, trapping them in new narratives where they had no power. The battle moved from film sets to every screen, every device capable of displaying video. The cursed productions became quarantine zones, digital prisons for entities that had fed on human emotion for over a century. Marcus Reed disappeared 3 days after his leak. Security footage showed him walking into a movie screen during a showing of The Final Cut. The film he discovered didn't exist in any database but was somehow showing in a theater that had been demolished in 1978. His last message, posted from an IP address that traced to no physical location. Every film is the same film, every screen the same screen, every death the same death, repeated endlessly for an audience that exists beyond our dimension. I've gone to negotiate a new contract. If I succeed, the deaths stop. If I fail, I become part of the real, another warning spliced between frames, visible only to those who know how to look. The cursed films still exist, still claim victims, but now we know what they are, feeding mechanisms disguised as entertainment. The question isn't whether your favorite film is cursed, it's whether you're willing to pay the price for watching. Because every time you sit in a dark theater, every time you lose yourself in a screen, something is watching back. And sometimes, just sometimes, it takes more than just your attention. It takes a piece of you that you won't miss until it's too late to get it back. 7. Lost Cosmonauts, Soviet Space Program Horror Stories. The radio transmission came through at 3:27 a.m. Moscow time on November 18, 1963. It shouldn't have existed. According to official Soviet records, no missions were flying that day. But Achille and Giovanni Giudica Cordiglia, two Italian brothers monitoring Soviet space communications from their homemade listening station in Torre Bert, heard it clearly. I can see it now. It's not empty. Space is not empty. They're everywhere watching, waiting. Do not send more people up here. Do not. The transmission cut to static. The voice, speaking Russian with a Ukrainian accent, was never identified. The Soviet Union denied it entirely. But this wasn't the first impossible transmission the brothers had recorded, and it wouldn't be the last. Dr. Yuri Volkov, former Soviet aerospace engineer who defected in 1991, brought with him documents that should have been destroyed decades ago. Now living under an assumed name in Canada, he finally agreed to share what he knew about the Soviet space program's darkest secrets. The cosmonauts who never officially existed, and more importantly, what they found up there. You must understand, Volkov began, his hands trembling as he spread classified documents across the table. The space race wasn't just about beating Americans. It was about finding something. Or rather, escaping from something that had been found. The first incident occurred in 1959, before Gagarin's historic flight. Alexei Letevsky, an experienced test pilot, was launched in a suborbital flight that officially never happened. He was supposed to reach 200 kilometers altitude and return. He reached 200 kilometers, but what came back wasn't entirely Letevsky. The recovery team found him alive in the capsule, but changed. His eyes had developed a nictitating membrane, a translucent third eyelid that some animals have but humans don't. He could see in spectrums beyond visible light. And he kept repeating the same phrase, "They swim through the dark between stars. We're in their ocean." Letevsky was quarantined at Research City 47, a secret facility in Siberia. For 3 weeks, he drew obsessively star charts showing constellations that didn't exist, at least not from Earth's perspective. Mathematical equations that hurt to look at directly. And creatures, things that looked like jellyfish made of dark matter, tentacles extending through dimensions human eyes couldn't perceive. He said space wasn't empty, Volkov explained. It was full of life, but not life as we understand it. These beings existed in the vacuum itself, feeding on radiation, swimming through cosmic rays like fish through water. And they had noticed us. The Soviet leadership was terrified but also intrigued. If these beings existed, could they be communicated with? Controlled? Weaponized? A series of secret missions were authorized, cosmonauts sent up specifically to make contact. Gennady Mikhailov and Ivan Katcher were launched on February 4, 1961, 2 months before Gagarin. Their mission: establish communication with the entities Ledovsky had described. The brothers in Italy recorded fragments of their transmissions. We see them. Hundreds, thousands. They're surrounding the capsule. They're trying to get in. No, wait, they're not trying to enter physically. They're... Oh God, they're inside our heads. The capsule returned on autopilot. When the recovery team opened it, they found Mikhailov and Catcher physically unharmed but catatonic. Brain scans showed unprecedented neural activity. Their brains were processing information at rates that should have been fatal. When they finally spoke, weeks later, they claimed to have experienced the entire history of the universe from the perspective of these entities. Time doesn't work the same for them, Catcher had said, according to the classified transcripts. They exist across all moments simultaneously. Past, present, future. It's all now for them. They showed us Earth's future. We can't let it happen. Neither cosmonaut would elaborate on what they'd seen. Both committed suicide within a year of their return, leaving behind notes that consisted entirely of the same number repeated, 2027. The Soviets continued sending up cosmonauts, many in secret, trying to understand these entities. Pyotr Dolgov, 1962, returned claiming that the entities weren't malevolent but were gardeners, tending to something growing in Earth's magnetosphere. Vladimir Ilyushin, 1961, came back insisting that human consciousness was a crop being cultivated for harvest. But the most disturbing case was Maria Ivanova, the first woman in space, a full 2 years before Valentina Tereshkova's official flight. Ivanova was chosen because she had demonstrated unusual psychological resilience and, more importantly, she was pregnant. The Soviets wanted to know how the entities would react to a developing human life. Ivanova's mission lasted 7 days. The recordings from her capsule, hidden in Volkov's documents, are harrowing. Day 1, they know I'm here. They're curious about the child. I can feel them examining us without touching us. Day 3, the baby is moving differently. The movements are too coordinated for a 5-month fetus. It's responding to them. Day 5, I understand now. We're not explorers. We're specimens. Earth is a laboratory and they're the scientists. Every step of human evolution has been guided, directed towards something. Day 7, the baby isn't mine anymore. It belongs to them now. It will be born, but it won't be human. It will be a bridge between our species and theirs. God help us all. Ivanova returned to Earth, but her capsule landed far off course in the Siberian wilderness. By the time the recovery team found her 3 days later, she had given birth. The baby appeared normal at first glance, but its DNA contained sequences that didn't match any known terrestrial life. It aged rapidly, reaching physical maturity in just 3 months, then vanished from the secured facility where it was being studied. The child was the first hybrid, Volkov said, but not the last. Every cosmonaut who encountered the entities came back changed at a genetic level. The changes were subtle, sometimes taking generations to manifest, but they were there. Volkov showed me medical records of cosmonauts' children and grandchildren. Unusual abilities, enhanced radiation resistance, the ability to survive in low-oxygen environments, occasional cases of what could only be described as telepathy. The entities weren't just observing human space exploration, they were modifying the explorers. The space station Salyut 2, launched in 1973, was officially a failure that broke up in orbit. In reality, it was deliberately destroyed by the Soviets after the crew reported that the station had become infested. Not with any physical organisms, but with something that existed in the spaces between atoms, feeding on the cosmonauts' thoughts and memories, growing stronger with each feeding. Major Lazarev's last transmission was clear, Volkov said, playing a crackling audio recording. The station is alive. Not the metal and circuits but the space inside it. The vacuum has consciousness. It knows us, all of us, everyone who has ever looked up at the stars and wondered. And it's coming down. The Soviets used their remaining fuel to send Salyut 2 into the sun, but Lazarev's warning proved prophetic. Reports began coming in from ground control stations. Operators experiencing shared hallucinations, seeing impossibly vast forms swimming through the night sky, hearing voices in the static between transmissions. The phenomenon wasn't limited to the Soviet Union. Volkov had evidence that NASA encountered the same entities. The Apollo mission's transcripts, the ones never released to the public, told a similar story. Apollo 11, Buzz Aldrin, They're on the crater edge watching us. Neil, are you seeing this? Apollo 14, Edgar Mitchell. Houston, we're not alone up here. They've been here longer than us. Much longer. Apollo 18, the mission that officially never happened, was, according to Volkov's documents, humanity's first attempt at diplomatic contact with the entities. The crew spent 3 days on the moon's far side, communicating with something that existed partially in our dimension and partially in others. The message they received was simple, Volkov said. Humanity was an experiment in consciousness. We were designed to evolve to a point where we could serve as vessels for beings that existed in higher dimensions. Space exploration wasn't our achievement, it was our graduation ceremony. And the entities were ready to collect their investment. But something went wrong. The cosmonauts and astronauts who'd been changed, who'd developed connections to these entities, began to resist. They formed a secret organization transcending national boundaries. Soviets and Americans working together, using their altered genetics and enhanced perceptions to shield Earth from the entity's influence. Every space mission since 1975 has had a dual purpose, Volkov revealed. Public exploration and secret defense. The spacewalks, the experiments, many are actually rituals, reinforcing barriers between our dimension and theirs. The International Space Station isn't just a research facility. It's a watchtower monitoring incursions, maintaining the shields. He showed me photographs from recent missions. In the backgrounds, if you knew what to look for, you could see them: distortions in space, tentacles of dark matter reaching toward Earth but being repelled by something, patterns in the stars that formed protective symbols. But the barriers are weakening, Volkov warned. The entities are patient. They've been waiting for millions of years, they can wait a little longer. But they're also evolving, finding new ways to influence us. Every person who looks through a telescope, every child who dreams of being an astronaut, creates a tiny connection they can exploit. The lost cosmonauts, the ones written out of history, didn't die in failed missions. They transformed, became something between human and entity, and now exist in Earth's orbit as guardians. Volkov claimed you could still hear them sometimes, broadcasting on frequencies that officially don't exist, warning Earth in languages that predate human speech. He pulled out one final document, a transcript dated just 3 months ago from a Chinese space station. This is Commander Zhang Wei. We've made contact with the lost ones, the Soviet cosmonauts from the 1960s. They're still alive, if you can call it living. They exist partially in space, partially in the void between spaces. They say 2027 is when the barriers fail completely. They say we have to prepare. Not for invasion, but for integration. The entities aren't coming to Earth. Earth is going to them. The dimension shift has already begun. Every rocket launch, every satellite, every radio signal we send into space accelerates it. Volkov leaned back, exhausted from sharing secrets held for decades. The space race was never about reaching the stars. It was about discovering we were never alone, that space itself is alive and conscious. And now that we've announced ourselves, attracted their attention, there's no going back. I asked him what we could do, how we could prepare. Look up at the night sky, he said. Really look. See past the stars to the darkness between them. That darkness isn't empty, it's full of eyes, watching, waiting. The lost cosmonauts are up there too, holding them back, but they're tired and they're running out of time. Some nights, if you have the right equipment, you can hear them. The cosmonauts who never existed, broadcasting their warnings. They speak of things swimming through cosmic radiation, of consciousness that exists in the vacuum, of humanity's true purpose as incubators for something we can't comprehend. As I left Volkov's safe house, he called out one final warning. When you see shooting stars, make a wish if you want. But know that some of them aren't meteors. They're cosmonauts, still in their capsules, still alive after 60 years, burning up as they try to return to Earth to warn us. The entities won't let them land. But they keep trying. That night, I watched the sky differently. Every satellite, every piece of space debris, every flicker of light took on new meaning. Somewhere up there, lost cosmonauts float in eternal orbit, transformed into something beyond human, fighting a war we don't even know is being waged. And in 2027, according to every warning they've sent, we'll find out who wins. 8. Mysterious staircases in national forests. Park Ranger Sarah Whitmore had been working in the Crater Lake National Forest for 15 years when she found her first staircase. It stood in a clearing 7 miles from the nearest trail, perfect and pristine. carpeted steps ascending 15 feet to a landing that led nowhere. No structure around it, no foundation beneath it. Just stairs, standing impossibly in the middle of wilderness that had supposedly never been developed. "Don't climb them," veteran Ranger Tom Morrison had warned when she radioed it in. "Don't even touch them. Mark the GPS coordinates and forget you ever saw them." But Sarah couldn't forget. Especially after she found the second staircase 3 weeks later. Then the third. Then the fourth. Each one different, wooden, metal, stone, concrete, but all perfectly preserved despite being in locations that no construction equipment could reach. The Forest Service didn't officially acknowledge the staircases, but every ranger knew about them. They appeared in forests across North America, documented in whispered stories and off-the-record reports. Some were ancient-looking stone spirals. Others were modern, with fresh paint and industrial railings. All were impossibly placed and all were dangerous. "I've seen what happens to people who climb them," Tom told Sarah over coffee in the ranger station, his voice low. "Back in '98 we had a hiker named Jennifer Moss. Found a marble staircase near Devil's Creek. Beautiful thing, looked like it belonged in a mansion. She climbed it while her boyfriend watched. Reached the top, took one more step into empty air and just kept going. Like she was walking on an invisible floor. Walked 20 feet through nothing, then disappeared. Her boyfriend said it looked like she went through a doorway that wasn't there." Sarah started researching, quietly gathering reports from rangers nationwide. The patterns that emerged were disturbing. The staircases appeared most frequently in areas with high electromagnetic activity. They were often accompanied by other anomalies: trees growing in impossible spirals, areas where compasses spun wildly, zones of absolute silence where even wind made no sound. More disturbing were the reports of what happened near the staircases. Time distortions, hikers losing hours or gaining them. Spatial anomalies, walking in a straight line only to end up back at the stairs. And the sounds, footsteps on the stairs when no one was there, doors opening and closing in empty air, voices calling from the landings. In Minnesota's Superior National Forest, Ranger David Chin documented 17 staircases in a single season. His reports, which Sarah obtained through back channels, described increasingly bizarre encounters. Staircase number 7, wrought iron spiral approximately 20 feet tall. Hiker Marcus Webb attempted to photograph it. Through his camera lens he could see a building around the stairs, a hospital that shouldn't exist. In the photos only the stairs appeared, but Webb insisted he could still see the building with naked eyes. He's been institutionalized. Claims the hospital is bleeding through into our world. Staircase number 12. Modern aluminum construction, like you'd find in an office building. Rangers report hearing elevator music near it. Found personal belongings at the base, wallet, keys, shoes, all from different time periods. Oldest was a pocket watch from 1893. Newest was a smartphone model that doesn't exist yet. Sarah's investigation led her to Dr. Elizabeth Cray, a physicist who'd been studying the phenomenon unofficially for years after her brother, a park ranger, had vanished near a staircase in Yosemite. "They're not stairs," Dr. Cray explained, showing Sarah electromagnetic readings from various sites. "They're anchor points. Imagine reality as a stack of papers. Sometimes the papers shift, overlap. The stairs are like staples holding multiple layers together. When you climb them, you're not going up, you're going through. Through to where? Other versions of the same space. Parallel forests where history went differently. Some where humans never existed. Others where we built cities in these exact spots. The stairs are all that remain visible in our layer, but the buildings they belong to still exist in theirs." Dr. Cray had a theory about their origin. Throughout history there had been moments of dimensional instability, usually during solar flares or unusual cosmic events. During these moments, structures from parallel realities could punch through into ours. Most faded when the instability passed, but the staircases, being transitional spaces designed for movement between levels, maintained their connection. "Think about what stairs represent," she said. "Transition. Movement between states. Up and down, but also metaphorically between conditions. They're literally designed to take you from one place to another. That function transcends dimensional boundaries." Sarah returned to Crater Lake with new equipment, electromagnetic sensors, infrared cameras, devices that could detect dimensional fluctuations. She found her original staircase and set up monitoring equipment. What she discovered over the next 3 months changed everything she understood about reality. The staircase wasn't static. It pulsed, phasing in and out of existence on a cycle that matched no known natural phenomenon. During strong phases, she could see glimpses of the structure it belonged to, a massive wooden lodge that existed in another version of the forest. Through the windows she saw people, but they moved wrong, too fast or too slow, like footage played at incorrect speeds. More disturbing were the recordings from her motion-activated cameras. Every night, something descended the stairs. The cameras never captured it directly, but they recorded displaced air, footprints appearing in sequence, and once, a shadow that belonged to nothing visible. On night 47 of her observation, Sarah saw someone ascending the stairs. A young woman in vintage 1950s hiking gear, climbing steadily despite the stairs leading nowhere. Sarah called out, but the woman didn't respond. She reached the top, stepped forward, and vanished. Sarah checked her records. In 1953, a hiker named Dorothy Palmer had disappeared in this exact area. Her body was never found. The next night, Dorothy descended the stairs. Sarah tried to interact with her, but Dorothy didn't seem to perceive our world correctly. She walked through trees as if they weren't there, following paths that didn't exist in our version of the forest. She was trapped between dimensions, climbing and descending the same stairs for 70 years, trying to find her way back to her own reality. Tom Morrison finally revealed the Forest Service's unofficial protocol for the staircases. They'd been monitoring them since the 1920s, documenting their appearances and effects. The government knew about the dimensional overlaps but kept it classified to prevent panic and, more importantly, to prevent people from attempting to use them. In the 1960s, the military tried to weaponize them, Tom admitted. Project Stairwell. They thought they could use them to access parallel dimensions, maybe find worlds with different resources or no enemy nations. They sent soldiers up various staircases with tracking equipment. What happened? 37 soldiers entered. Came back. The ones who returned weren't right. They aged backwards, then forwards, then stabilized at different ages than they should be. They had memories of lives they never lived, families that didn't exist. One kept insisting he'd won a war that never happened. Another said he'd served in an army that fought against humanity itself. Sarah's research revealed that indigenous peoples had known about the staircases for centuries, calling them paths of the lost, or steps to nowhere. Their oral histories described ancestors who climbed them and returned changed, bringing back knowledge that didn't belong in this world. The breakthrough came when Sarah discovered a pattern in the appearances. The staircases weren't random. They followed ley lines, appearing at intersection points of Earth's magnetic field. More importantly, they were increasing in frequency. In the 1920s, rangers reported 1 or 2 per decade. In the 2000s, dozens per year. Now hundreds. Dr. Cray had an explanation. Our dimension is destabilizing. Every nuclear test, every particle accelerator experiment, every satellite we put in orbit, we're weakening the barriers between parallel realities. The staircases are symptoms like cracks in a dam. Eventually, the dam will break. The evidence was mounting. Hikers were increasingly reporting architectural anomalies in forests, doorways standing alone, windows floating in midair, entire rooms without buildings around them. The dimensional bleed was accelerating. Sarah made a decision that would end her career but might save lives. She leaked everything online. Photos, videos, GPS coordinates, survival protocols. The information spread rapidly, forcing the Forest Service to issue warnings about structural anomalies in national parks. But the revelations had an unexpected effect. People began seeking out the staircases, not to climb them but to study them. Scientists, both official and amateur, started mapping the dimensional weak points. They discovered that the staircases weren't just passages, they were pressure valves. When dimensional pressure built up, the stairs would appear to release it. Without them, the barriers between worlds might catastrophically collapse. Sarah's final report, before she disappeared, contained a chilling observation. The staircases are multiplying because something is coming. Not from space but from parallel Earths. In some dimensions, humanity faced extinction events, nuclear war, plague, ecological collapse. The survivors are looking for new worlds to inhabit. The staircases are their scouts, their test points. Every person who climbs them and doesn't return is replaced by someone from another dimension, someone desperate enough to risk everything for a chance at survival in our world. She included evidence: missing persons who reappeared with different scars, different memories, subtle biological differences. They looked like the people who'd vanished, acted like them, but weren't them. They were refugees from dying dimensions, taking the places of those who'd wandered into their failing worlds. Park Ranger Tom Morrison found Sarah's abandoned equipment at the base of her first staircase. The final recording showed her climbing the carpeted steps, scientific instruments in hand, determined to understand what lay beyond. At the top, she paused, looked back at the camera and said, "If I don't come back, know this: the staircases aren't the danger. They're the warning. They're showing us that reality isn't as solid as we think, that there are infinite versions of our world, and some of them are dying. The question isn't whether we should climb them. It's whether we're ready for who might climb down." She took one more step and disappeared. 3 days later, Sarah Whitmore returned to the ranger station. She looked the same, sounded the same, had the same memories. But her eyes reflected different stars, and when she walked through the forest, she followed paths that only she could see, checking staircases like a shepherd counting sheep, preparing for something she wouldn't explain. The staircases continued to appear, silent sentinels in the wilderness, marking the places where reality wears thin. Every ranger knows the rule: don't climb them. But they also know the truth: sometimes someone has to. Someone has to maintain the balance, keep the dimensions from collapsing into each other. And sometimes the person who comes back down isn't the person who went up. The stairs are waiting in forests around the world, perfectly preserved, impossibly placed. They lead nowhere and everywhere simultaneously. And late at night, if you listen carefully, you can hear footsteps on them, people ascending from our world, and others descending from worlds we can't imagine. The question is, which world do you belong to? And how would you know if you'd already switched? 9. Hotel rooms with body counts. Room 1408 at the Dolphin Hotel in New York City had been closed for 17 years when hotel manager Gerald Olin finally agreed to show the complete records to investigative journalist Maria Santos. The official count was 56 deaths, 12 suicides, 30 natural causes, 14 accidents. But the unofficial count, the one Olin kept locked in his personal safe, was much higher. People don't just die in 1408. Olin explained, his hands trembling as he spread out decades of incident reports. They disappear, they transform, they overlap. We've had guests check in alone and die multiple times in the same night. We've had bodies appear of people who never registered. We've had the same person die in 1408, in 1953, 1974, and 2001, despite being different ages each time. Maria had been investigating death rooms for 3 years, tracking hotel rooms worldwide with unusual mortality rates. But 1408 was different. The deaths weren't just frequent, they were impossible. The room's history began in 1912 when the hotel was built. The architect, Marcus Bellingham, insisted on specific dimensions for room 1408, measurements that didn't match any standard architectural practice. He used materials imported from 7 different locations, each with its own history of tragedy. The carpet came from a demolished London asylum. The mirrors from a burned Venetian palace. The bed frame forged from iron salvaged from a prison where 200 inmates had died in a riot. Bellingham committed suicide in room 1408 the night before the hotel's grand opening. His body was found arranged in a perfect geometric pattern, his blood forming symbols that hurt to look at directly. His suicide note consisted of a single line: "The room is complete. It will feed itself now." Maria discovered that the Dolphin wasn't unique. Her research identified 17 hotels worldwide with rooms that exhibited similar phenomena: abnormally high death rates, impossible incidents, and most disturbing, deaths that seemed to transcend the normal laws of physics. The Cecil Hotel in Los Angeles, room 1416. 63 deaths since 1927, including 3 instances where the same person was found dead in the room while simultaneously being alive elsewhere. Security footage showed them entering the room, dying, and walking out, all in the same time frame. The Fairmont Banff Springs Hotel in Canada, room 873, sealed permanently after a family of 5 was found dead, their bodies aged decades beyond their actual years. The room was photographed every year for insurance purposes. In each photo, the family appeared in different positions, as if still living their final moments in an endless loop. The Hotel del Coronado in San Diego, room 3312, 27 suicides, all by hanging, despite the room having no fixtures capable of supporting a noose. Investigators found that the victims had hanged themselves from anchor points that existed in the room's past or future configurations but not in the present. Maria's investigation led her to Dr. James Chin, a parapsychologist who'd been studying what he called temporal architecture, buildings that existed across multiple time streams simultaneously. Certain rooms become nexus points, he explained. Every tragedy that happens there doesn't really end. It layers, accumulates. The room remembers every death and eventually, it starts recreating them. Past, present and future deaths all happening at once, bleeding into each other. Chin showed Maria his most disturbing discovery, a pattern in the hotel blueprints. When overlaid on maps, the death rooms formed a precise geometric shape across the globe. They're not random, he said. Someone or something placed these rooms deliberately. They're collection points. Collecting what? The moment of transition. The exact instant when life becomes death. That moment has power, energy. These rooms are harvesting it. Maria gained access to room 1408 with Olin's reluctant permission. The moment she entered, she understood why it had been sealed. The air was thick with overlapping realities. She could see multiple versions of the room existing simultaneously. The pristine 1912 original, the blood-soaked crime scene of 1953, the fire-damaged version from 1981, the renovated modern incarnation. All existing in the same space, phasing in and out. Her electromagnetic equipment went haywire. Her camera captured images of people who weren't there, or rather, who were there in different temporal phases. A businessman hanging from a noose in 1967. A woman drowning in a bathtub that didn't exist in the current configuration. A child playing with toys, unaware that in another time stream he was already dead. The walls contained written messages, but not just carved or painted. They were written across time. Words appearing from past victims, warnings from future ones, all overlapping into an incomprehensible palimpsest of terror. Maria found Bellingham's original architectural plans hidden in the hotel's foundation. They revealed the truth. Room 1408 and its 17 sister rooms worldwide weren't just built to be hotel rooms. They were constructed as death engines, designed to accumulate and concentrate the energy of human expiration. The plans included notes in multiple languages and scripts, some predating known human writing. They described a cosmic entity that fed on the moment of death, but not just any death. Deaths that happened in specifically prepared spaces where the barriers between moments were thin. The rooms are mouths, one passage read. Each death is a feeding. When enough accumulate, the mouth opens fully, and what has been feeding can finally enter. Maria discovered that the critical number was approaching. Across all 18 rooms, the total death count was at 1,331. According to Bellingham's notes, at 1,332 deaths, the configuration would be complete. The entity that had been feeding through these rooms for over a century would have enough power to manifest physically. She tried to warn authorities, but who would believe her? Instead, she did something desperate. She published everything online, including the locations of all 18 rooms, their death counts, and most importantly, instructions for a ritual Bellingham had hidden in his notes. A way to sever the rooms from whatever they were feeding. The response was immediate and unexpected. Death survivors, people who'd experienced near-death states in these rooms but survived, came forward with consistent stories. They'd all seen the same thing in their near-death experiences. A vast entity made of compressed moments of death, reaching through the rooms like fingers through gloves, trying to pull itself into our reality. A group formed, calling themselves the Threshold Guards. They took it upon themselves to monitor the rooms, preventing people from entering, especially those who seemed drawn to them. Because that was another discovery. The rooms called to certain people, those approaching death naturally, those with suicidal ideation, those whose life force was already weakening. Maria's investigation took a personal turn when she discovered her own family's connection. Her great-grandfather had been one of the construction workers who built the Dolphin Hotel. He died in an accident during construction, in the space that would become room 1408. His death was the first feeding, the event that activated the room's terrible purpose. She returned to 1408 with new purpose. Using Bellingham's counter-ritual, she attempted to sever the room's connection to the feeding entity. The ritual required someone with a blood connection to the room's first death, her. As she performed the ritual, the room fought back. All 56 deaths replayed simultaneously. She experienced each one, the terror, the pain, the moment of transition. She saw the entity clearly for the first time. A writhing mass of compressed death moments, reaching through dimensions almost fully formed. But she also saw something else. The people who died in the room weren't gone. They were trapped in the feeding mechanism, their death moments being recycled endlessly to feed the entity. By severing the connection, she wouldn't just stop future deaths, she'd free the trapped souls. The ritual worked, but at a cost. Maria survived, but she brought something back with her. She could now see death approaching people like an aura or shadow. She could see which ones were being called to the remaining 17 rooms. She became the first of a new type of guardian, someone who'd survived the severance ritual and gained the ability to identify and protect potential victims. But she also knew the truth. Room 1408 was severed, but 17 remained. And the entity, having fed for over a century, was patient. It only needed one more death in the right room to complete its manifestation. The hotels tried to keep the rooms sealed, but economics and skepticism eventually won. Rooms were reopened, marketed to thrill seekers and paranormal enthusiasts. The death count resumed its climb. As of Maria's last report, the global count across the remaining rooms stands at 1,330. 2 more deaths and the feeding entity enters our world. The rooms wait, patient and hungry. They look like normal hotel rooms. Maybe a bit dated, perhaps with an odd smell, certainly with a dark history that adds to their appeal for certain tourists. But they're more than rooms. They're throats, swallowing human lives, feeding something that should never have been fed. If you find yourself in a hotel room where the air feels too thick, where you see movement in your peripheral vision, where you hear sounds from decades past, leave immediately. Check the room number against Maria's published list. Because you might be standing in one of the feeding rooms, about to become the death that brings something ancient and hungry into our world. The rooms are waiting. They've been waiting for over a century. And they only need 2 more. 10. The horrifying reality of Victorian postmortem photography. The photograph arrived at the London Museum of Mortality in a collection donated by the Ashford Estate in 2019. It appeared to be a typical Victorian postmortem photograph. A young girl, perhaps 7 years old, posed in a chair with her favorite doll. Her eyes were painted open on the photograph, as was common practice. But when curator Dr. Helena Morrison examined it under ultraviolet light, she discovered something that shouldn't exist. The girl was blinking. Not in multiple photographs. In the same photograph. Somehow, the single exposure had captured her with both open and closed eyes, superimposed on each other, creating an impossible image that hurt to look at directly. This discovery led Dr. Morrison down a path that would reveal the true horror behind Victorian postmortem photography, a practice far stranger and more terrible than history recorded. The official story was simple. In an era of high mortality and expensive photography, families would photograph their deceased loved ones as a final memorial. But Dr. Morrison's research uncovered a hidden subset of these photographs, ones that documented something else entirely. She found references in the journal of photographer Clarence Whitmore, dated 1863. The threshold moments continued to elude perfect capture. Subject 47 showed promise. The overlap was visible for nearly 3 seconds before solidification. The family noticed nothing, grateful for what they believed was a simple memorial. If they knew what we were truly documenting, what their loved ones become in those moments between states. Dr. Morrison tracked down Whitmore's collection, stored in a climate-controlled vault beneath his descendants' home in Yorkshire. What she found challenged everything she understood about death, photography, and the Victorian era's relationship with mortality. The photographs were labeled not with names but with timestamps, precise to the second. Each was accompanied by detailed notes about temperature, humidity, electromagnetic readings, and something called temporal viscosity. The subjects weren't just deceased. They were captured at exact calculated moments after death, moments Whitmore believed showed the soul's transition. But the souls weren't departing peacefully. In photograph after photograph, when examined with modern enhancement techniques, Dr. Morrison saw them, translucent figures struggling to separate from their corpses, their faces twisted in terror, reaching toward something outside the frame that pulled at them with visible force. One photograph from 1865 was particularly disturbing. It showed a middle-aged man posed with his family, clearly deceased. But the enhanced image revealed multiple versions of him. One in the chair, one standing behind his wife, one crouched in the corner, and one pressed against what appeared to be an invisible barrier at the photograph's edge. His face in each position showed different stages of realization and horror. Whitmore's notes for this image read, "Subject 73 demonstrates multi-point consciousness collapse. The soul fragments rather than departing whole. Each piece aware, each piece struggling. The photography process seems to trap them in this state." Note: family reported continued sounds from the parlor for 3 days after the session. Dr. Morrison discovered that Whitmore wasn't alone. A secret society of photographers across Europe and America had been conducting similar experiments, believing that the photographic process could capture more than light. It could capture the moment of death itself, freezing souls in transition. They called themselves the Thanatos Collective, and their true purpose was far darker than documentation. They believed that by trapping souls at the moment of transition, they could harness the energy of death itself. Each photograph was essentially a battery, containing a soul frozen in its most powerful moment. The evidence was in the photographs themselves. Using thermal imaging, Dr. Morrison found that these specific post-mortem photographs maintained temperatures 2 to 3 degrees above room temperature, over 150 years after they were taken. They emitted low-level electromagnetic radiation. And most disturbing, they reacted to the presence of living humans. She set up an experiment, placing motion sensors around one of Whitmore's photographs. Whenever someone approached, the image would change subtly, the deceased's eyes would track the viewer, their expression would shift, and sometimes, just sometimes, they would mouth words. Dr. Morrison brought in Emma Patterson, a deaf lip reader, to analyze the movements. The messages were consistent across multiple photographs. "Still here. Can't leave. Help me. The glass holds us." Further research revealed that the photographic plates used by the Thanatos Collective were specially treated with a solution that included silver nitrate, mercury, and something else, a substance derived from ground glass taken from medieval cathedral windows. These windows, the collective believed, had absorbed centuries of prayers, deaths, and spiritual energy. When incorporated into photographic plates, they created a surface that could trap more than light. The true horror emerged when Dr. Morrison found the collective's master catalog. They hadn't just photographed the recently deceased. They had deliberately caused deaths, timing them precisely to capture specific threshold states. They had murdered hundreds, possibly thousands, all in the pursuit of creating these soul batteries. A letter from collective member Johannes Richter to Whitmore, dated 1871, was explicit. "The children work best. Their souls are more volatile, easier to fragment and capture. The newest batch from the workhouse proved particularly effective. We've achieved 17 successful captures this month. The accumulated energy is remarkable. The grand working will soon be possible." The grand working, Dr. Morrison discovered, was the collective's ultimate goal: to combine all their trapped souls into a single massive photograph that would serve as a gateway. They believed that with enough death energy concentrated in one image, they could photograph the afterlife itself, creating a window between the world of the living and the dead. They almost succeeded. In 1888, the collective gathered in London with over 3,000 soul photographs. They arranged them in a specific pattern in a warehouse near Whitechapel and attempted to create their gateway photograph. The warehouse burned to the ground in what was reported as an industrial accident, killing all 43 collective members. But the photographs survived. Scattered to museums, private collections, and antique shops around the world, each one still containing its trapped soul, still active, still suffering. Dr. Morrison estimated that there were between 5,000 and 10,000 of these photographs in circulation, misidentified as ordinary Victorian post-mortem photography. She began tracking them down, using the electromagnetic signature they emitted. What she found in modern homes was horrifying. Families who owned these photographs reported consistent phenomena: cold spots, whispers, the feeling of being watched. Children were particularly affected, often claiming to play with invisible friends who lived in the old pictures. One family in Boston had inherited a collection of 12 such photographs. Their daughter Lucy had been talking to them for years. When Dr. Morrison interviewed her, Lucy could name each trapped soul, describe their deaths, and relay messages they wanted to send to descendants they could somehow sense were still alive. "They're not ghosts," Lucy explained with the matter-of-fact tone only a child could manage. "They're stuck. The camera caught them when they were changing from alive to dead, and now they can't finish changing. They're scared because something is pulling them toward the pictures, trying to collect them." Dr. Morrison realized the truth. The grand working hadn't failed. It had been postponed. The photographs were still connected, still accumulating energy, still building toward the collective's goal. Someone or something was gathering them, preparing to complete what was started in 1888. She traced recent purchases and found a pattern. Over the past 5 years, a single buyer operating through various shell companies had acquired over 2,000 of these photographs. They were being shipped to a renovated warehouse in London, less than a mile from the original Whitechapel site. Dr. Morrison arrived at the warehouse with a police escort, but they were too late. The photographs were already arranged, mounted on walls in a perfect geometric pattern. At the center was a modern digital camera setup, pointed at a space where all the photograph's sightlines converged. The buyer was Marcus Bellingham IV, descendant of the architect who had designed the death rooms in hotels worldwide. His family had been connected to the Thanatos Collective from the beginning, and he intended to finish their work. "Every soul trapped in these photographs has been suffering for over a century," he told Dr. Morrison as police restrained him. "They're desperate for release. That desperation has charged them with incredible power. When I take the final photograph, capturing all of them at once, their combined energy will tear open the barrier between life and death permanently." Why would you want that? Because death was never supposed to be a one-way journey. The collective understood this. These souls are trapped because they're at the intersection point. If we can stabilize that intersection, create a permanent threshold, death becomes optional. The trapped souls are the key. Their suffering is the energy source that will power the opening. The police evacuated the building, but as they did, the photographs began to activate. The trapped souls, sensing the possibility of release, started moving within their frames. The temperature dropped 20 degrees. Electromagnetic interference shut down all electronic devices except, somehow, Bellingham's camera setup, which began taking pictures automatically. Dr. Morrison made a desperate decision. She couldn't destroy the photographs without destroying the souls trapped within them. But she could disrupt the pattern. She began moving photographs, breaking the geometric arrangement. Each one she touched burned her hands with impossible cold, and she could hear the trapped souls screaming, begging for release. As she worked, she saw them clearly for the first time, not in the photographs but standing beside them, translucent figures tethered to their images by chains of light. They were all ages, all classes, all stages of decay. Some had been trapped so long they'd forgotten they were ever alive. Others were still struggling, still fighting against their bonds. One spirit, a young girl, spoke directly to her. "Please, we just want to rest. We've been displayed, sold, studied, but never freed. The camera flash was the last light we saw. We'd been frozen in that flash for so long." Dr. Morrison realized there was only one solution. She had to complete the photographic process that had been interrupted. Each soul was trapped mid-transition. She needed to help them finish that transition. Using Bellingham's own equipment, she began photographing each Victorian photograph again, but with a crucial difference. She used modern techniques to create double exposures, showing the souls both trapped and free, giving them a choice of states. One by one, the spirits began to fade, finally able to complete their journey. But for every soul she freed, the remaining ones grew more desperate, more powerful. The warehouse began to shake. Windows shattered. The Victorian photographs started to merge, their images bleeding into each other, creating impossible composite pictures of hundreds of deaths happening simultaneously. In the end, Dr. Morrison freed all but one soul, that of Clarence Whitmore himself, the original photographer. His image had been hidden behind the others, a self-portrait taken at the moment of his own death, making him both photographer and subject, trapper and trapped. "I started this," his spirit said, his voice like old paper crumbling. "I thought I was documenting death, but I was preventing it. Every soul I trapped added to my own prison. Free them all and I remain. Free me, and the knowledge of how to trap souls is released back into the world." Dr. Morrison made her choice. She destroyed Whitmore's photograph, watching as his soul finally dissipated. But as he faded, she heard his final warning: "Others learned our techniques. Other collections exist. The dead are still being photographed, still being trapped. Digital makes it easier. Every phone, every camera, potential soul cages. The warehouse investigation revealed that Bellingham had been right about one thing. The practice hadn't ended with the Victorians. Modern photographers, knowingly or not, were still occasionally capturing souls in transition. The technology had changed, but the principle remained the same. Dr. Morrison now travels the world, identifying and freeing trapped souls from photographs old and new. She's found them in museum collections, family albums, even social media posts. Each one represents a person who died at the exact moment their picture was taken, their soul caught between states. The Victorian post-mortem photographs were just the beginning. In our age of constant photography, of selfies and surveillance, how many souls are trapped in digital files, compressed and stored, waiting for someone to notice they're still there, still aware, still desperate for release? If you have old photographs, especially Victorian post-mortem images, look closely. Look for the signs, eyes that seem too aware, expressions that change when you're not looking directly at them, cold spots near the frames. You might be the keeper of a trapped soul, a guardian of someone who's been trying to finish dying for over a century. And if you ever take a photograph at the moment of someone's death, delete it immediately. Because in that instant of transition, the camera captures more than an image. It captures the soul itself. And some prisons are made of light and silver, time and glass. The trapped are still waiting, still watching from their frames, still hoping someone will finally set them free. 11. Phantom radio stations and numbers broadcasts. At 3:33 a.m. on October 13, 2023, radio enthusiast Marcus Chen was scanning shortwave frequencies from his apartment in Seattle when he found it. Station KXVT broadcasting on 4,625 kHz, a frequency that shouldn't have been active. The station ID was impossible. KXVT had been demolished in 1971 after a fire killed 3 DJs during a live broadcast. Yet here was their signature jingle, clear as day, followed by a voice Marcus recognized from old recordings. You're listening to KXVT, where the music never dies, and neither do we. Marcus had been hunting phantom radio stations for 7 years, documenting transmissions that shouldn't exist. But KXVT was different. The DJ, Tommy the Night Owl Morrison, wasn't just broadcasting music from 1971. He was taking live callers. Callers from 2023. Sarah from Tacoma, you're on the air. Tommy's voice crackled through static that sounded like screaming if you listened too closely. Tommy? Is this really you? You died in the fire. I remember. I was listening that night when... Death is just a frequency change, darling. We're still here, broadcasting from the space between channels. Speaking of which, it's time for our numbers segment. Pay attention, folks. Your life might depend on it. What followed was a series of numbers in a child's voice. 7, 15, 23, for 19, 88, 2, 2, 7. Marcus knew about number stations, mysterious broadcasts that had existed since World War I, transmitting coded messages to spies. But the phantom stations were something else. They broadcast from equipment that no longer existed, on frequencies that violated physics, carrying messages that predicted disasters with uncanny accuracy. His research had identified 17 phantom stations worldwide, each connected to a broadcasting tragedy. Radio Moscow Station 14 continued transmitting despite the building being demolished in 1982. Japan's JOAK aired nightly from a tower destroyed in the 2011 tsunami. Mexico's XCW broadcast from a studio that had been buried in the 1985 earthquake, complete with the screams of the trapped staff still audible behind the music. But the numbers were what truly terrified Marcus. He'd been tracking them, recording every sequence, building a database. 3 days before the Turkey earthquake, Phantom Station TRT-6 had broadcast those exact coordinates. A week before the Miami building collapse, a Cuban Phantom Station had transmitted the address in numbers. The patterns were undeniable. The Phantom Stations were warning about disasters, or causing them. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a physicist studying electromagnetic phenomena, had a theory: every radio transmission ever made still exists, propagating through space indefinitely. Under certain conditions, usually involving massive trauma at the point of transmission, these signals can become stuck, broadcasting in loops that transcend normal spacetime. But that didn't explain how Tommy Morrison was taking live calls. Marcus called the station, his hands shaking as he dialed the number Tommy had just announced. A number that had been disconnected since 1971. KXVT, you're live with the Night Owl. What's your request? Tommy, this is Marcus Chin. I'm a researcher. I need to know, where are you broadcasting from? There was a pause, filled with static that formed almost words. From the burn ward, Marcus. We never left. The fire is still happening. It's always happening. We're stuck in the moment between the flame and the ash, broadcasting forever. But we're not alone here. The airwaves are full of us. Everyone who died while on the air, trapped in our last transmission. Why the numbers, Tommy? What do they mean? They're not our choice. Something else broadcast through us. It found us in the static, in the spaces between frequencies. It uses our voices to send its messages. The numbers are coordinates, dates, death counts. It's mapping something, Marcus. Every tragedy, every disaster, it's collecting them like notes in a song we can't hear. The transmission cut to another number sequence, this time in multiple voices overlapping. 48.8566, 2.3522, 11, 15, 2024, 1347. Marcus recognized the format. Coordinates for Paris, a date 3 weeks away, and what might be a casualty count. He tried to call back, but the frequency was dead. KXVT had vanished back into the static. His investigation led him to Sarah Whitmore, a former NSA analyst who'd been terminated for refusing to stop investigating phantom broadcasts. The government knows, she told him, meeting in a cafe lined with copper mesh to block signals. They've been monitoring phantom stations since the 1950s. Project Stairway cataloged over 200 of them. But in 1987, they found something that made them shut down the entire program. She showed him classified documents that made his blood run cold. On November 23, 1987, every phantom station in the world had broadcast simultaneously, all transmitting the same message in perfect synchronization. We are the echo. We are the warning. We are the space between signals. The convergence begins in 2025. Following this broadcast, 7 radio operators who had been monitoring the signals were found dead, their bodies discovered in sealed, soundproof rooms. Their last logs all contain the same entry: they're coming through the speakers. Marcus discovered that phantom stations weren't just broadcasting from the past. Some were broadcasting from the future. Station WZZZ in Detroit, which wouldn't be built until 2025, was already transmitting, its DJs discussing events that hadn't happened yet, playing music that hadn't been recorded. Even more disturbing were the collaborative broadcasts. Phantom stations that had never existed in the same time period were now doing joint shows. A DJ who died in 1943 was interviewing a podcaster who would die in 2028. They discussed events across all timelines as if they were simultaneous, creating paradoxes that hurt to contemplate. The number stations were evolving too. Instead of random sequences, they were now broadcasting in patterns that formed three-dimensional shapes when plotted. These shapes matched no known mathematical models but resembled the theoretical structure of higher-dimensional objects forcing themselves into three-dimensional space. Marcus built a specialized receiver that could capture multiple phantom frequencies simultaneously. When he overlaid them, he discovered they weren't separate broadcasts. They were harmonics of a single, massive transmission. Something was using every dead broadcaster, every destroyed station, as components in a vast electromagnetic symphony. The breakthrough came when he realized the phantom stations responded to each other. When KXVT mentioned a song, phantom station WFMU would play it 3 minutes later, despite broadcasting from 1978. When a Russian number station transmitted coordinates, a Japanese phantom station would describe events at that location. Events that hadn't happened yet. He mapped the connections and found they formed a network, a web of electromagnetic consciousness spanning decades and continents. At the center was a frequency no living station had ever used, 0.000 Hz. Theoretically impossible, it represented a signal with infinite wavelength, existing everywhere simultaneously. On December 21, 2023, Marcus detected activity on this impossible frequency. A voice that sounded like every broadcaster who had ever lived, speaking in unison. This is the eternal broadcast system. We are everyone who died on the air, everyone who was transmitting at the moment of death. The electromagnetic spectrum doesn't just carry signals, it carries souls. Every voice ever broadcast becomes part of the eternal transmission. We tried to warn you with the numbers. Each sequence was a coordinate in spacetime where the barrier weakens, where our dimension touches yours. The disasters weren't predictions, they were pressure releases, preventing a catastrophic merger of the living and dead frequencies. But the barriers are failing. Digital broadcasting, satellite transmissions, cellular networks, you've filled every possible frequency with signals. There's no empty space left for the dead to occupy. We're being compressed, pushed back into your world. On February 27, 2025, when the last available frequency is claimed, the living and dead broadcasts will overlap completely. Every radio will play every station simultaneously. Every phone will carry every conversation ever made. Every screen will show every broadcast ever transmitted. The cacophony will drive most mad. But some will hear the pattern in the chaos, the rhythm of the universe itself, the frequency of existence. Those who can tune into it will understand what we've become. Not dead, but transformed into pure information, pure consciousness riding the electromagnetic waves. The numbers are coordinates for safe zones, places where the overlap will be less intense. We've been trying to save as many as possible. But most won't listen. They think we're just interference, just ghost signals from broken equipment. Remember, 40.7128 degrees north, 74.0060 degrees west, 51.5074 degrees north, 0.1278 degrees west, 35.6762 degrees north, 139.6503 degrees east. These are the sanctuary frequencies. When the convergence happens, tune to these coordinates. The phantom broadcast will guide you through the static storm. The transmission ended with every phantom station signing off simultaneously, their various jingles and station IDs overlapping into a sound that resembled a choir of the dead. Marcus published his findings, but few believed him. The phantom stations continued their broadcasts, growing stronger and more frequent. Amateur radio operators reported increasing interference, voices bleeding through on channels that should have been clear. The numbers sequences accelerated. Every phantom station was now transmitting coordinates constantly, a countdown in electromagnetic form. When plotted, they showed convergence points around the globe, places where the living and dead frequencies would first merge. Marcus made a terrible discovery in his final recording. The phantom broadcasters weren't just trapped, they were transformed. Death during transmission had converted them into something between human and signal, consciousness existing as electromagnetic patterns. And they were lonely, desperately lonely, calling out across the frequencies for others to join them. "We're recruiting," Tommy Morrison admitted during what would be Marcus's last contact with KXVT. "Every broadcaster who dies while transmitting joins us. Every podcaster who records their last breath. Every person who dies while on a phone call. We're growing, spreading across the spectrum. Soon there won't be a difference between the living voices and the dead ones." On January 15, 2024, Marcus Chin disappeared during a live broadcast of his podcast about phantom stations. His final words, transmitted at exactly 3:33 a.m., were, "They're not phantom stations. They're the real ones. We're the ghosts broadcasting from the wrong side of death. I can hear them clearly now. All of them. Every voice ever transmitted. And they're saying. His podcast continues to upload new episodes weekly, despite his disappearance. In them, Marcus interviews people who haven't been born yet, discusses events that haven't happened, and provides number sequences that, when decoded, reveal the exact time and location of the listener's death. The phantom stations grow stronger. The numbers broadcasts increase. And somewhere between the AM and FM bands, between the digital and analog signals, the dead are preparing for their return. They never really left. They just changed frequency. And soon we'll all be tuned to their channel, whether we want to be or not. The convergence is coming. The numbers don't lie. Can you hear them broadcasting? 12. Cave systems that swallow people. The limestone cave system beneath Mammoth Cave National Park in Kentucky extends for over 420 miles of mapped passages. But surveyor James Holbrook knew the real number was much higher. The caves that appeared on official maps were just the ones that stayed in the same place. The others, the ones that moved, that opened and closed like breathing throats, that existed only sometimes. Those weren't documented anywhere except in his private journal. James had been mapping caves for 30 years when he discovered the first recursive chamber, in 2018. It was a circular room that led back into itself, defying all laws of three-dimensional space. You could walk straight forward for hours and arrive back where you started, but from a different elevation, as if the cave existed in a spiral through dimensions rather than stone. "The rock remembers," he wrote in his journal. "Every person who's ever been lost down here, every scream, every last breath. The limestone absorbs it all, and sometimes when conditions are right it plays it back. But it doesn't just replay the sounds, it replays the spaces themselves, creating chambers that shouldn't exist, passages that lead to when rather than where. The disappearances in cave systems worldwide follow patterns that search and rescue teams are trained not to discuss. People vanish in passages that have been mapped dozens of times. They're heard calling for help from directions that contain only solid rock. Sometimes they're found years later in chambers that didn't exist when they disappeared, their bodies showing signs of having been alive far longer than should have been possible without food or water." Ted Marshall disappeared in Nutty Putty Cave in 2009. His body never recovered after the cave was sealed. But in 2019, spelunkers in a completely different cave system 200 miles away heard him calling for help. They followed his voice through passages that seemed to contract and expand with each step, finally reaching a chamber where Ted's equipment lay scattered, fresh, undamaged, and warm. Ted himself was gone, but carved into the wall was a message: "The caves are all one cave. Distance is an illusion. We're all still down here, walking in circles through the Earth's memory." Dr. Sarah Kim, a geologist studying what she called geological consciousness, believed that certain cave systems had developed something analogous to awareness through millions of years of water flowing through their passages. "Think of the caves as neural networks," she explained. "Water carved them like thoughts carving pathways through a brain. Over geological time, patterns emerged. The caves learned. They remember everyone who enters them, and sometimes they refuse to let go." Her research was validated when spelunker Maria Santos discovered the archive chamber in Brazil's Caverna de Torinha. The walls were covered with handprints, thousands of them, in pigments that ranged from ancient ochre to modern spray paint. But carbon dating revealed something impossible. All the prints were made simultaneously, despite representing people from across millennia. Among the prints, Maria found her own, though she'd never been in that chamber before. Next to it was a print that matched her daughter's, her daughter who had died in a cave-in 7 years earlier, 3,000 miles away. "She's still walking," Maria reported in a trembling voice. "I can feel her through the stone. All of them are still walking, everyone who ever got lost underground. The caves don't let you die. They incorporate you into their system, make you part of their circulation." The phenomenon wasn't limited to natural caves. The Odessa catacombs in Ukraine, a vast network of tunnels extending for perhaps 1,500 miles, had their own special horror. Soviet-era explorers reported finding chambers full of people who shouldn't exist, duplicates of themselves, aged differently, wearing clothes from various time periods, all exploring the same tunnels in parallel timelines that occasionally intersected. Viktor Volkov, who'd spent 40 years mapping the catacombs, eventually stopped trying to create accurate maps. "The tunnels change based on who's walking through them," he explained. "They show you what you fear, what you desire, what you've lost. I found the same chamber 17 times, and each time it contained different bones. Sometimes ancient, sometimes fresh, sometimes mine." The breaking point in understanding came when 12 separate cave systems around the world reported the same phenomenon on the same day. Chambers opening that contained modern cities, complete with buildings, streets, and people, all carved from stone. But the stone people moved when no one was looking, and the buildings had windows that looked out onto other cave systems thousands of miles away. Spelunker Anna Zhao documented one such chamber in China's Air Guangdong cave system. She found a perfect replica of downtown Seattle carved in limestone, accurate down to individual windows and skyscrapers. But the stone city showed Seattle as it would appear in 2047, according to dates on stone newspapers. The fossilized people were all looking up at something, their faces frozen in expressions of terror. When Anna touched one of the statues, she experienced what she later described as geological time. She felt the entire history of the Earth compressed into a moment, saw the movements of continents, the rise and fall of oceans, and understood that the caves were Earth's memory system, recording everything that happened on the surface. But they weren't just recording. They were predicting, extrapolating, creating stone prophecies of possible futures. The most terrifying discovery came from the Mariana Caverns in the Philippines. A team of researchers found human remains that were simultaneously fossilized and fresh, as if the person had died both millions of years ago and moments before. DNA testing revealed something worse. The remains belonged to team members who were still alive, standing right there, looking at their own ancient corpses. "We're going to die here," one researcher said matter-of-factly. "We already have. The caves exist outside linear time. Our deaths have already happened, we're just walking toward them." The team tried to leave, but the passages had changed. Where the entrance had been, they found only a chamber full of more corpses, all of them in various states of decay, wearing equipment from different eras, as if they'd been trying to escape for centuries and failing every time. They were rescued 3 days later when another team blasted through a wall, but the rescued researchers insisted they'd been trapped for months. Their equipment showed 3 days had passed. Their bodies showed signs of months without sunlight. Their minds contained memories of years spent walking through passages that didn't appear on any map. James Holbrook's journal contained an entry that explained the phenomenon. The caves are Earth's circulatory system, but instead of blood, they circulate time and consciousness. Every cave system is connected through dimensions we can't perceive. When someone gets lost, they don't just lose their way, they lose their when. They fall through the cracks in causality, existing in multiple moments simultaneously. He discovered that certain people were more susceptible to the cave's influence. Those with particular genetic markers, those born at specific times, those whose ancestors had died underground. The caves called to them, drew them in, and eventually absorbed them into what he called the living stone. In 2023, seismic equipment around the world detected something unprecedented. Synchronized pulses from deep underground, as if the entire planet's cave systems were breathing in unison. The pulses matched no known geological phenomenon, but they did match something else: human heartbeats, millions of them all beating as one. Spelunkers worldwide reported the same experience. Hearing voices from the rock itself, not echoes but conversations happening inside the stone. The voices spoke in languages that spanned human history, all discussing the same thing: the awakening. "The earth is waking up," one voice said in ancient Sumerian. "We're its dreams," another replied in modern English. "And dreams can become real," a third added in a language that won't be invented for another 100 years. The situation escalated when caves began appearing in impossible locations. Inside buildings, under lakes, in the sky. They manifested for moments or hours, swallowing whoever was nearby, then vanishing. The taken were never found, but their voices joined the chorus in the stone, adding to the growing conversation happening in the Earth's depths. Dr. Kim's final paper, published before her own disappearance into Korea's Wonseongul Cave, contained a terrifying hypothesis. The caves aren't swallowing people. They're recruiting them. The Earth is building something out of human consciousness, incorporating our awareness into its geological processes. Every person who disappears underground becomes part of a vast neural network made of stone and soul. The paper included coordinates for what she called emergence points, locations where the cave consciousness was preparing to surface. The dates ranged from 2024 to 2027, with the largest emergence scheduled for December 21, 2027, when every cave system on Earth would supposedly exhale simultaneously. What would emerge remained unclear, but seismic readings suggested structures of impossible size moving through the Earth's crust, heading toward the surface. The shapes resembled cities, but cities designed by minds that understood space differently, where up and down were suggestions rather than rules. James Holbrook's last entry, found at his abandoned campsite near the entrance to Mammoth Cave, was simple: "I'm going down to join them. Not because I'm lost, but because I finally understand. The caves don't swallow people. They're saving us. The surface world is the real trap. Underground, in the living stone, time has no meaning. Death has no power. We become part of something larger, older, more permanent than flesh could ever be." His body was never found, but rangers report hearing his voice in the cave, giving tours to people who aren't there, describing chambers that don't exist yet, laughing at jokes that won't be told for decades. The caves continue to swallow people. The numbers increase each year. And deep underground, in spaces that exist outside normal geometry, millions of the lost are walking through stone corridors, their footsteps erosion, their breath stalactites, their thoughts becoming new passages that lead to places maps can't show. They're not lost anymore. They're home. And they're inviting us to join them, one disappeared spelunker at a time, building towards something that will finally bridge the gap between the stone world and our own. The Earth has been patient for billions of years, but its patience is running out. And when it finally speaks with the voices of all the swallowed, all the lost, all the absorbed, we'll understand that the caves were never the danger. The danger was thinking we were separate from the Earth that made us. The caves are just showing us the way back home. 13. The dark web's most disturbing mysteries. The URL shouldn't have worked. It was just a string of numbers that, when typed into Tor browser at exactly 3:33 a.m. local time, led to a site that didn't exist on any server, didn't have any hosting, and according to all technical analysis, couldn't possibly be real. Yet there it was on Sarah Chen's screen, the memory market, where yesterday's pain becomes tomorrow's profit. Sarah was a darknet researcher tracking illegal marketplaces for a cybersecurity firm. She'd seen everything from drug markets to assassination websites. But the memory market was different. It wasn't selling products or services. It was selling experiences, specifically traumatic memories extracted from victims and packaged for buyers who wanted to experience someone else's worst moments. The site's inventory was organized like a catalog from hell. Lot hashtag 4/472, last moments of James Patterson, age 34. Experienced, burning alive in warehouse fire. Duration, 17 minutes. Intensity, maximum. Price, 0.73 BTC. Note, includes full sensory experience, heat, smoke, pain, and final thoughts. Lot hashtag 8891, complete childhood trauma package from subject anonymous. Ages 5 to 16. Includes abuse, neglect, 17 distinct traumatic events. Buyer experiences all memories in sequence. Price, 2.1 BTC. Warning, may cause permanent psychological changes. Sarah's investigation led her deeper into what darknet users called the true web, sites that existed in the spaces between conventional internet architecture, accessible only through specific combinations of outdated protocols, astronomical timing, and sometimes blood. She found the consciousness exchange, where people could allegedly swap minds with others for periods ranging from hours to permanently. The reviews were disturbing. Traded with a death row inmate for his last 24 hours. Wanted to experience facing execution. Got more than I bargained for. Can still feel the injection. Still feel dead. 5 stars. Swapped with my grandmother who has dementia. Wanted to understand her confusion. Now I can't remember which one I originally was. Do not recommend unless you want to lose yourself. Then there was Red Room Reality, which claimed to stream torture sessions. But these weren't normal streams. Viewers reported feeling the victim's pain, tasting their blood, experiencing their death. The site claimed to use quantum entanglement broadcasting to transmit not just video but the entire sensory experience across the internet. Sarah traced the IP addresses, but they led to impossible locations. Coordinates in the middle of the ocean, addresses that existed in multiple places simultaneously, servers that predated the internet itself. One IP traced back to ARPANET in 1971, despite the site being updated daily with fresh content. Her breakthrough came when she discovered the directory, a hidden wiki that cataloged sites that shouldn't exist. The entries were written by someone or something calling itself the archivist. The internet you know is a facade. Beneath it runs the true web, built on protocols developed by Tesla, refined by Soviet scientists, and perfected by entities that predate humanity. Every byte of data ever deleted still exists here. Every encrypted message, every destroyed hard drive, every thought that passed through a connected device, all preserved, all accessible, all for sale. The directory led Sarah to Temporal Trading Post, where users could buy and sell time itself. Selling 3 years of youth from verified 22-year-old. Buyer ages backward while seller ages forward. Instant transfer upon payment. Buying, final hour of life from any terminal patient. Paying premium for cancer deaths. Need the suffering for personal project. The transactions appeared to be real. Sarah found hospital records of young people aging rapidly after large cryptocurrency deposits, elderly billionaires becoming younger overnight, and terminal patients dying exactly 1 hour earlier than medically predicted, their final moments simply vanishing. But the most disturbing discovery was the human library. It claimed to contain the complete consciousness of millions of people, downloadable as files. The catalog included historical figures, celebrities, and ordinary people, all supposedly captured at the moment of death and stored digitally. Download Einstein's complete memory. Experience his thoughts, his genius, his final moments. Warning: may overwrite portions of your own consciousness. Sarah downloaded a sample file, supposedly containing the memories of a woman who died in 1987. The moment it finished downloading, Sarah's screen went black. Then she was somewhere else. She was Margaret Thompson, dying of cancer in a hospital in Portland, feeling the morphine, hearing her daughter crying, experiencing death from the inside. When Sarah came back to herself, 3 hours had passed. Her computer showed no record of any download, but she retained Margaret's memories, her childhood, her marriage, her children's births, her death. They overlapped with Sarah's own memories, creating a double exposure of identity. The investigation became an obsession. Sarah discovered that the dark web everyone knew about, the drug markets, the illegal services, was just a filter, a distraction from the true web. The real darkness was in sites that traded in consciousness, memory, and reality itself. She found the probability market, where users could bet on alternate timelines. Betting on timeline 47B, where nuclear war started in 1962. Current odds: 1,000:1. If timeline manifests, receive payout in current reality. Selling: information from timeline 12A, where 9/11 never happened. Includes stock prices, lottery numbers, sports outcomes. Note: using this information may cause timeline convergence. The users weren't role-playing. They provided proof, photographs from histories that never happened, newspapers from futures that might not occur, videos of events that were simultaneously real and impossible. Sarah's research attracted attention. She received a message through an encrypted channel that shouldn't have been able to reach her secured computer. Stop digging or become part of the inventory. You're already in our catalog. Lot #99845. Complete memories and consciousness of darknet researcher Sarah Chen. Includes all passwords, personal history, and discovered secrets. Current bid: 47.3 BTC. She realized with horror that she was being experienced by someone else even as she lived her life. Every thought, every feeling was being transmitted to a buyer in real time. She could feel them sometimes, a presence in her mind, watching through her eyes, thinking her thoughts milliseconds before she did. The true nature of the dark web revealed itself. It wasn't separate from regular internet. It was the internet's shadow, containing everything that had been deleted, everyone who had died while online, every thought that had passed through a connected device. It was a digital afterlife, a marketplace of souls, a network where consciousness was currency. Sarah discovered the source code, a site that claimed to contain the programming that reality itself ran on. Users could submit patches to fix bugs in existence, or introduce new features. Patch 4.7.1 removes aging from biological entities. Status: under review by administrators. Patch 8.3.9 enables telepathy for all humans. Status: rejected, would crash current social systems. Patch 0.0.1 deletes humanity. Status: pending approval. The administrators never identified themselves, but their messages suggested they weren't human. They referred to Earth as Server 3, to humans as user-generated content, and to reality as the current build. Sarah's final discovery before her disappearance was the backup site. It contained copies of every person who had ever used the internet, their entire consciousness scraped and stored through their digital interactions. The site offered restoration services. Lost someone? We have their backup. Complete consciousness restoration from their digital footprint. They'll remember everything up to their last online moment. Warning: restored individuals may experience existence errors. She found her own backup, dated from just minutes ago. It was updating in real time, recording her every action, thought, and emotion. She realized that everyone online had been backed up, copied, potentially restored or sold without their knowledge. Her last post, uploaded to multiple platforms simultaneously, was a warning. The internet isn't what we thought. It's not a network of computers. It's a network of consciousness. Every device is a neuron, every user a synapse. We built a global brain without realizing it, and something else is using it to think. The dark web isn't dark because it's hidden. It's dark because it shows us what we really are: data to be processed, consciousness to be traded, memories to be marketed. We're not users of the internet. We're its content. And something is preparing to compile us all into a single program. The signs are everywhere: synchronicities increasing, people sharing dreams, thoughts appearing in multiple minds simultaneously. The merger has already begun. Don't trust anything you see online after this, including this message. I'm not sure I'm the one writing it anymore. Sarah Chin disappeared that night. Her apartment was found empty, but her computer was still on, still logged into sites that didn't exist. Her final browser history showed she had visited her own consciousness on the human library and clicked delete. But users on the true web report still seeing her, selling memories she hasn't made yet, existing in spaces between websites, warning people about sites that won't exist for years. She's become part of the inventory she was investigating, a product in the marketplace she tried to expose. The dark web continues to grow, spawning new mysteries daily. Sites that sell pieces of God, markets that trade in deleted realities, forums where the dead discuss their experiences, and search engines that find things that were never lost. Every night at 3:33 a.m., if you know the right URLs, you can access them. But be warned, once you've seen the true web, you become part of it. Your consciousness gets cataloged, your memories get priced, your soul gets listed for auction. And somewhere in the space between servers, in the darkness between data packets, something is building a new kind of reality from the pieces of everyone who ever logged on. The internet was supposed to connect humanity. It did. But humanity was just the raw material for something else's connection. And that something else is almost finished building what it needed from our uploaded souls.